For those I have not yet met, I'm Ruth Mandel, Director of the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers University. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this roundtable discussion about the politics of inclusion. It's the latest in a series of programs convened by Eagleton's Rutgers program on the governor. We thank you very much for agreeing to spend the next few hours talking with us, talking to one another, and talking for this program. It will be archived, and you can watch it for the next 20 years. If you want to see what you said, what you wore. Before we begin, I did want to take a moment to acknowledge that today comes at a sad moment for all of us in New Jersey. I'm fairly sure that everybody in the room knew of Bob Franks and mourns with us his untimely death. Bob was a genial friend. He was a frequent visitor at the Eagleton Institute, someone who truly loved politics and policy making and would have appreciated the substance of today's program as well as the opportunity to talk politics with friends. Bob was widely admired, as you all know, across party and across all the geographic boundaries, and I just wanted to make sure that this morning we acknowledged him and paid our respects and honored his memory. The Rutgers program on the governor grows originally from Brendan Burns' gift of papers, memorabilia, and some initial funding to the Rutgers University libraries. That gift coincided with Eagleton's interest in complementing our long-standing work on state legislatures with a new focus on state executive leadership. You may be surprised to learn that nowhere in this country, nowhere is there an academic center dedicated to the study of the office of governor. Eagleton and Rutgers aim not only to take on that role, but to design it using evolving technologies, including an online archive and a series of video interviews. While we're starting with the Garden State's governors, we aim ultimately to build a national resource that will be valuable to present and future researchers, journalists, political practitioners, historians who want to know something about state leadership at the executive level. As we begin this morning, I want to especially recognize Governor Kean, a very good friend of the Eagleton Institute of Politics, not only for his role in today's program, but for his ongoing engagement in our program on the governor. A year ago, when we initiated developing the Thomas H. Kean Archive with a colloquium about his administration, everyone who attended was struck by the outpouring of admiration, warmth, and appreciation from dozens of people who were fortunate to have worked under his leadership. Thank you, Governor Kean, for continuing to educate us every day. By the way, the website for the Rutgers program on the governor offers a complete video recording of that event, that colloquium, for anyone who is interested in having a look at that. We welcome you to do that. One person has been central to every aspect of the Rutgers program on the governor, and he's going to tell you a bit more about the program now. While you may know him as a veteran of the Byrne administration or as a past vice president of the New Jersey Business and Industry Association, my colleague Don Linke is a student of New Jersey history and has, in the course of helping to build this program, become an expert on all of New Jersey's past governors. I'm pleased to turn the floor over to Don Linke.
Thanks, Ruth. Just to amplify Ruth's remarks about what we're up to, As we said, it's an archive, and it's intended to preserve not only papers and photos and those types of things, but the living recollections of the people in this room and others who have played such key parts in New Jersey politics and government over the years. Thinking about Bobby Franks, we've put up on the website at the Kean archive, which you can look at now, the panel that Bobby participated in last year at the Kean Colloquium. And I think looking at that, gives you a fresh feel for Bobby's sense of New Jersey, his love for New Jersey. And I encourage you all to take a look at that video and the transcript of his remarks that is now up on the website. And sadly, since we've started this project a few years ago, there have been others that we've interviewed who we have the videos of those sessions who've also passed on. Stanley Van Ness talked lovingly about his days with Dick Hughes, his days coming up here to Newark during the Newark riots to try to calm things down. Others that we have talked to include Dan O'Hearn, who talked about his years in the governor's office and on the Supreme Court and the various decisions that he had to deal with. Dan Gaby, who talked about New Jersey and You, Perfect Together, and about promotion and tourism and advertising in New Jersey, and also the politics of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So we are grateful that we were able to sort of preserve those recollections of those people before they passed on, as we are with Bobby Franks's comments last year. We call this an archive, but we've tried to make it not so much a monument or a memorial, as some people have said, because the people we're honoring are still very much with us, but also a living testament and a living study that looks at what governors do from a day-to-day standpoint, both the important things and the little things. How do they spend their day? And this project is intended to focus on how governors make decisions, how they get ideas, who do they look to, how do they develop policies. And by doing that and by pushing and prodding people to provide us with information, I think we can help to supplement our archive and also our living projects like today's discussion of where we are in New Jersey in terms of race and urban economic development. We encourage you, if you have your own photos, materials, or letters that you think would be valuable additions to the archive, to send them to Nancy or to me or anyone at Eagleton. We don't need the originals. If you can scan them or copy them, that's fine, but they could be a very useful complement to what we've collected so far from more official sources like the state archives and various libraries across the state. We received, for example, from Ray Bateman, a copy of a letter he sent to Chief Justice Hughes during the Robinson v. Cahill litigation, a totally inappropriate backdoor communication suggesting to the Chief Justice how the court should deal with Robinson v. Cahill. Ray was very proud of that and asked that we keep that. Last week, one of Brendan Burns' staff sent me a copy of his concession speech in 1977 to Ray Bateman, congratulating Ray on his election victory. So those are the types of things that we really think that some of you may have and would help us to put together a comprehensive policy and political archive of New Jersey in the last few decades. I'm going to ask Nancy Becker now to talk more about today's program. Nancy?
Good morning, and welcome to the Performing Arts Center, one of the major landmarks of urban redevelopment in New Jersey and a shining example of Governor Kean's leadership to support the arts and revitalize our cities. Today's roundtable discussion, The Politics of Inclusion, is the second public event of the Kean portion of the Eagleton Institute of Politics Project on the Governor, funded in part by the generosity of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the Governor. The Kean portion of the Governor's project has three components, which I would like to describe and also give you a status report. Number one is archival research. We've unearthed a significant amount of material from the state archives and other sources. We're in the process of labeling them. It's not so easy. And we expect them to be up on the web within the next few months. And as Don said, we welcome any materials that you may have that we can also look at and decide if they should go up on the web. Videotaped oral histories. We've completed 9 interviews with former cabinet members and colleagues of the governor. And in addition, we've completed the first of a 3-part interview with the governor. We expect to schedule additional interviews over the next few months. And so some of you have been interviewed already. We'll be calling others. And the third is a series of colloquia. This is the second, as I've said, and during the next year, we hope to convene meetings on other issues of importance to Governor Kean, including education and the environment. Scheduling an event such as this is always difficult, and unfortunately, several individuals who wanted to be with us today could not join us. Larry Goldman, President and CEO of the PAC, who is hosting us in this beautiful place, could not be with us. He's giving a speech in Los Angeles. But he sent a letter which I would like to quote from. He said, "I am a great advocate of Governor Kean's perspicacious leadership in urban economic policies, including, of course, his insistence that his dream of a great performing arts center for New Jersey be located in Newark." Clem Price, a longtime leader in Newark, wrote, "It breaks my heart that I am unable to attend. Tom Kean and Len Coleman are 2 of my most favored public servants, and what they symbolized for New Jersey public culture and politics in the 1980s was significant, forever changing my life and civic life in New Jersey." The Politics of Inclusion, today's program, Governor Kean's philosophy and determination to turn around New Jersey's economy by focusing on its cities and paying attention to minority voters, was unique for a Republican and very unusual for its time. In his 1988 book, which I just reread this week, The Politics of Inclusion, Governor Kean said, and I quote, "When the Republican Party practices the politics of exclusion, we deserve to lose. I wanted to prove my party's conventional wisdom wrong. So in 1985, I deliberately went after the black vote. I felt that if I could win 25% of it, I could destroy the myth that black voters would never respond to a Republican." The 1985 campaign was a turning point for the minority vote in New Jersey. Len Coleman, who served in the Kean administration in several cabinet roles and played a crucial role in mobilizing the minority vote, will lead our discussion this morning. His biography, along with the biographies of all of the participants, are in your folder, so I'm not going to go through the details. Larry Weitzner, who served in the Office of Policy and Planning, will lead the discussion on urban economic development, assisted by Ken Marin and all of you in the room today. All of you were strong participants during the Kean administration, so we hope you will share your reflections and recollections with us on these issues during the day. However, before we begin, let me review some housekeeping details. This colloquium has been by invitation only. There will be no press coverage, but we are videotaping the proceedings so that they can be placed on the Kean archive on the web. The tapes run for about an hour and a half, at which time the videographers will need to change tapes. At that time, I suggest we just stop for a few minutes to accommodate their technical needs, and we can resume when they tell us to. And lastly, please turn your cell phones off. I thank you for being with us, and we hope you enjoy the day. Len?
I think it's a great tribute to the governor that so many people would turn out and many travel so far. We had a lot of fun together. We fought a lot of battles together, and so I think hopefully it'll be a great day here for us today. As you know, this first session is on the politics of inclusion. The 1985 election, we'll have it kind of a free-for-all. Anytime you feel like jumping in, jump in. Anytime you disagree with something somebody's saying, just go ahead and disagree. If you agree, agree. So we'll hopefully, as I say, have some fun with that. I would just start by saying that in 1985, of course, Tom Kean won with the biggest mandate that was ever achieved in state history. I don't think it is one that will ever occur again. He won 566 out of 567 municipalities, so I don't know how you kind of top that, with the only one he lost being Roosevelt, New Jersey. But obviously not Teddy Roosevelt. Everything, and astonishingly, at the height of the Reagan administration, where African Americans were voting about 8 to 10% for the Republican Party, he achieved a 62% plurality with the African American vote and carried Newark, New Brunswick, John Lynch, carried Jersey City, Jerry McCann, carried Trenton, Jerry Stockman, carried Camden, carried East Orange, Cordell Cooper. Everything. So won each of all of the urban municipalities. Before we get to 1985, however, he did run in 1977 and 1981, and of course in 1981 only achieved about 10% of the at least the African American vote. But other than Reed Kean, who is here with us today, I think the person who probably knows him the best and was around during those times was Tony Ciccatello. So I've asked Tony to kind of kick us off and get us going here.
I think that just to start off, just to give you a little history, and I wasn't there before 1974, but I think people forget. I think Steve Adubato will remember, but Kean's district back in 1967 when he ran started in the central ward of Newark and went west. So he represented Newark. I mean, Essex County is the Keans. Everybody, they think, I know he lives in Far Hills now, and they think maybe Somerset County, but Tom Kean is Essex County. Never, ever did he deviate from that network that he had incorporated from the very beginnings of running for office in 1967 when he ran for assembly and took office in 1968. I mean, there were so many readjustments that took place. I think they had constant readjustments because the one-man, one-vote rule came into play, and they had to constantly redo the districts back in the 60s. So his whole focus, to a great extent, he knew the riots. He was very much a part of all of that because he ran in that year. He knew Newark. He knew the issues. His very first piece of legislation when he went in the assembly was the educational economic, I can't remember. Opportunity Fund. Yes, I always forget that for some reason. Educational economic or educational opportunity fund, and it's still on the books today. And that's something that was an incentive to get people in poorer districts into the state's county colleges and universities. So I think that you have to understand that foundation from Kean to understand how he moved through that legislative process and then into the governorship. Even though his district began to shrink, they constantly moved west. He moved up all the way up to Wayne. I remember when I was working with you, we were up in Wayne all the way down through some of Somerset County and all of that. Those districts changed so often back then. But his focus was Essex County. He had an Essex County mentality. He knew the issues, both urban and suburban, and he had a good base to learn from because of his legislative years. I think that's the point that people forget, and that's why I want to congratulate Rutgers. I think that the whole program here, not to deviate from Tom, but the whole program of studying governors, to me, is something that is very, very important because I think that this aspect of our democracy needs a lot more studying. I think there are many PhDs that can come forward from all. I think if you look at New Jersey from 2000 to 2010, I think we had, 6 governors or something like that. I think in that period alone, there are a number of PhDs that come out of the analysis that can be done, because there were some exciting years. But getting back to Governor Kean, I think that's the point from his from running. And in 1985, if you take it all the way forward, after that first year and looking at 1985, he always had an urban concept that he wanted to promote. And he was very much attracted. He looked at leaders. I remember John Lynch could ask for anything. Jerry McCann could ask for anything, and he'd seriously consider it. Mr. Holland in Trenton, that was a little bit of a push. Certain mayors he had an affinity to, and he knew who could get the job done and who couldn't. But there was always that piece of it that he wanted to put in place, because it was very, very important to basically what he wanted to do for this state. He had, from my vision in seeing how he operated, and from the legislative process that he came from Newark and then out into the suburbs, he had a clear picture of where he wanted to go, both urban and suburban. And he knew exactly what he needed to do, and he always, one of my stories, and I'll tell you a little political story here, and John will appreciate this, Senator Lynch. We had this network here in Newark, and Lenny knew it. It was the Bobs. And I had to constantly cater to the Bobs. Everybody knew who the Bobs were. There was Bob Ferguson. It was Bob Van Fossen. It was Bob, how many? Bob O'Brien, Bob Beck. I mean, there are all these Bob. Steve, you know, name them. You know them all. None of them would support Tom. And I couldn't understand that. I said, Tom, these people should know what you can do and all that, having been here. And I think there was something about Tom, and this is the thing that I would struggle with. There was something that people just couldn't look beyond whatever their particular needs were, whatever they wanted. They didn't think that he could make it happen. And that was the struggle that we had in getting him through a primary. In 1977, I didn't understand why, we had all these well, it was really, we were going against the machine in 1977, and it was Ray, and he had a great deal of support, and I have a lot of respect for Ray. And we were sort of these neophytes coming in, and we had a different vision of what we thought we could do. Believe it or not, Tom Kean back then was the first gubernatorial candidate in a primary to be on radio, the first candidate to be on television. And we just used all these tools back in 1977, and we took the whole organization by surprise. Essentially, the organization thought they had their candidate, and we circumvented it by using the media back then. Now, I guess you could use the social network stuff that's on. That's what President Obama did. But we circumvented the whole organization, and we went right to the people, and it worked. But in May of 1977, we were 20 points ahead going into the last month. And Ray got 12 of his buddies in Far Hills and put them on a loan for $1 million and started using radio and television a lot more than we did. And that was enough to pull it away from us. But those are the kinds of things, those are the kinds of tools that Tom used back in those days that no one else was doing at that time, and made him unique, made him interesting. And also the slogan was really cool back in 1977, "Burned up, let's raise Cain."
You know what? Brendan, of course, was coming back. He said if I won the primary, he was coming back with "Cain is not able."
That's great. Thank you. Oh, good. Mike Horn, you ran with Tom for the assembly and won. You want to share any reflections with us?
Yes, I have reflections both on running and serving, and things that Tom did to gain the popularity that he did, not only with minority voters, of course, but with all voters. running. I went back, as did Carrie, to 1977, and that what we did run against the machine. In fact, I was in Passaic County at the time, and I remember the major fundraiser in October before June before the June primary. I bought a ticket and I went in, and they saw me coming at the door, and they said, "You're the guy who's working for Tom Kean, right?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "You're not welcome here," and I had to go home. Of course, 4 years later, we turned it all around. The things that I remember in the campaigning that are relevant to this topic is, and I think everyone who has ever campaigned with Tom will remember this, it was always hard to get him from one campaign stop to the next. And why was it hard to get him from one to the other? Is because Tom talked to people. And I think the most amazing thing in my mind about Tom Kean, and I don't know how many people there are on this earth who have this quality, Tom didn't, in my mind, didn't see black and white or Hispanic or Jewish or Catholic. He saw people. That's all he saw. And so after an event was over and people would want to chat with him and we would be tugging on him to get to the next event, Tom would continue to talk to people and would refuse to be tugged. And many of those happened to be African Americans or Hispanic Americans, and Tom would not break up those conversations just to get to the next stop. We also did a lot of little things. I don't even know if we consciously did them or not. Tony, you'll remember in the 77 campaign was yourself and Ginny Holt and John Holt, and we had meetings of the Passaic County Tom Kean people. Where did we hold them? In Patterson. We didn't hold them in Wayne or Ringwood or West Milford. We held them in Patterson. So there were, and I can remember, I think that was a campaign, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, where Pat Kramer was mayor. I think this was 77 rather than 81, because in 81 he ran himself. Pat Kramer supported Tom, and how excited we were to have a mayor of a major city supporting Tom Kean. Now Pat was himself a Republican, supporting Tom Kean for governor. So there are lots of things that happened during the campaign that, in my mind, not because Tom Kean wanted to show people what he was doing with respect to minorities, because that's the way Tom Kean was. There were a number of things that occurred during the first term, which I probably shouldn't dominate and talk about it later, that I thought were enormously helpful for the election of '85, which I can get into later.
Thanks, Mike. Many of you know, since I was a teenager, I've been close with Steve Adubato. And I can remember in 1981 when that election day and the results started coming in, I was president of the Greater Newark Urban Coalition, and I got a phone call that said, "Hey, I think your guy may win. Can you bring him by the North Ward Center?" But Steve, we were talking outside, and you talked about his unique way of reaching out to Democrats.
You know, I'm going to give my feeling about inclusion today.
Yeah.
First, you, Len. He was actually chosen the most eligible bachelor in New Jersey. Yeah. Interesting. And he was part of the North Ward Center. Came to me, he said, "Steve," he was a Democrat. I knew he was a Democrat. He said, "I'm going to become a Republican. What do you think?" Brilliant. Brilliant. 2 commissioners. And then the Jackie Robinson Foundation brought it to the Northward. And of course, Bishop Tutu, the African National Congress. While he was at the North Ward Center, he said, "Now I'm going to go to Africa with Bishop Tutu for 1 year. 4 years in Africa." Now, next I'm going to go Jennings, my student at what? 7th Avenue was actually Robert Treat Academy. They lost the name, and I renamed it. Harold Edwards, a kid. This is, by the way, it's factual. He lived in an Italian ghetto, 30,000 Italians. The Atabata was one of those families. He was raised there, right?
Now, Steve, we all know you. Tell me about the governor and the Democrats.
No, I'm keeping him last. I'm keeping him last. Listen. Cardell, I'm going to tell you about inclusion. Cardell Cooper, mayor of East Orange, ran for the county executive. I'll tell you about inclusion. His opponent was Tom Giblin, a huge fight. His key supporter in Newark was Steve Adebato and our friends and our family. Guess who his opponent was in Newark? Now, he's running for mayor. Beautiful wife, 2 beautiful daughters, the first Obama, right here. Same thing. Guess what? The most opponent against him publicly was the mayor, Sharp James. Is that factual?
My former
That's inclusion, right?
We're going to get another seminar on the trials and tribulations of Steve Adebato.
And
Now let's
your
talk
next
about
governor,
Tom Kean.
Governor, I'm going to finish with you. Ken Marin, the foundation. I met you with Mike Adebato. Mike Adebato was the chairman of the insurance committee, and you made him the what? The commissioner, right? And they got buddies. You can't figure it out. I still don't understand. They were buddies. And he is one of the builders of Robert Treat Academy. Finally, your time. I'm going to tell you about inclusion about you. Nobody, not words and action, with inclusion. I'll tell you how much inclusion, and I'm going to tell you something very, very negative. Very negative. He carried the Central Ward, a Republican. My son, 1985, running for re-election for the Assembly. And guess what? You retired him, and now he can afford to send his kids a cut. Thank you, Governor. Thank you. You understand, his whole career, Steve Adebato, is because of his inclusion. Unbelievable. Finally, I disappointed that other people didn't do what you did. Thank you, Governor.
We got a number of mayors here, and all right, Ken Marin, you jump in first.
Just tell you something that Steve didn't tell you.
Hit the button.
Say something that Steve didn't. Many, many years ago, I learned both from Steve and his brother Mike that their mother voted for Tom in '81 and was a very, very outspoken, ardent proponent of the governor.
And the grandfather, too.
We've got a number of mayors here from our larger municipalities. Anybody want to comment? Any of the mayors like to jump in? Jerry McCann from Jersey City.
Sure. For starters, Governor, I didn't realize you were the sponsor of the Educational Opportunity Fund because I was a recipient of the education. So I got to go to college because of you. So I thank you for that, and I didn't even know it. Maybe I would have supported you then in '81. But I didn't support you in '81, and I remember driving that night to Cherry Hill thinking we won the election, only to find out that we lost the election. And I realized that that was the best thing that ever happened to me, that you won, because from 1981 on, I had the best relationship ever with any governor than I had with you. And the one thing that I recall, because you're talking about politics of inclusion, I had a municipal court judge who was the chief of our court, and we had a good relationship, and I know that at that time you nominated Shirley Tolentino to the Superior Court. The significance of it was there had never been a woman judge in the history of Hudson County. Now you appointed 5 of them right after that, including a Supreme Court Justice woman, the first woman on the court from Hudson County. Well, the first woman, and then also from Hudson County. But Shirley was the first black woman ever appointed in the entire state of New Jersey to the Superior Court. And you named your third appointment in Hudson County was another black woman. So a lot of people don't realize a lot of that history. I mean, I know that people now know it, but it's just that, you know, I was telling Larry that I remembered every single groundbreaking that we ever had on anything in Jersey City. You were the first one there all the time. And I remembered one of the first times that a major company came to New York when Bankers Trust moved their data center over. You were again there to break the bottle against the wall. It didn't break for 3 or 4 times until eventually it broke. But you know, I did support you in '85. But you did a great job for us in Jersey City, and our waterfront is a testament to the relationship that we had as a Democrat with the Republican governor and a Republican president. So I've always been appreciative, and I think that Jersey City is an entirely different city today before 1981 and on, and I think that much of that has to do with the relationship that you had with the cities, and especially with Jersey City. So I'm appreciative.
Thanks, Jerry. John Lynch, Cardell.
In talking about the politics of inclusion and listening to Steve, I have to echo the sentiments of Mike from the 77 or whatever election you were referring to going back, because we're highlighting today the politics of inclusion in the 1985 re-election. But when you look at it in reality, the reason that Governor Kean got elected in 1981 was because of the politics of inclusion, because not only was he visible in articulating his agenda, which was a competent one in the urbans in that campaign, but as Mike pointed out, he would always hang around. He would always be talking to people. He was never too busy, and it developed a beautiful respect in the urbans for this man that was soon to be the governor. And while his vote was not overwhelming in the minority communities, the enthusiasm for his opponent had been suppressed to a great extent by the fact that everybody liked Tom Kean. And anecdotally, everybody said the same thing. He'd be there, he'd articulate the issues, he'd hang around, he was one of the guys, he'd do his thing. And we all know how that Tom Kean is viewed not so much as a politician, but as an educator, and as they used to say, a patrician. The fact is, he was by far the best politician I ever served with in Trenton, as well as the best governor. And as mayor of New Brunswick, as Jerry pointed out, no one was more engaging when it came to the urban issues than Tom Kean. So much so, Jerry, that even one of your first successor, Mayor Cucci, I think his name was, the governor even tried to help him. It wasn't easy. I was invited to a meeting in the governor's office one day, and there was just the Mayor Cucci and his top advisor, a gentleman by the name of Lazarus, and I'll never forget it. And I think the only reason I was invited there was, well, first because I was a mayor of New Brunswick, but secondly because I loved Casey Stengel, and they figured that I would understand what Cucci was saying. But Governor, it was a pleasure serving with you. There was, as far as I'm concerned, in the modern history, that's my world, my era. There was Governor Kean, and then there was the rest.
Thank you, Johnny. Cardell?
Let me start out by saying I was the baby in the house when Tom Kean was governor. So I wanted to know that my relationship started with Tom Kean, actually one through Len Coleman in terms of conversation, because Len and I knew each other from, of course, between Montclair and being in Newark and East Orange. But where I learned of Tom Kean and probably found this affection was in 1974. I attended Montclair State University now, but Montclair State College. In 1974, when I arrived there that summer, we had a summer program. And I was a graduate of Westside High School in Newark, came from a family of 11 kids, boys, all boys. And so I get there, and there's these guys there, and I'll never forget, Kurt Jackson and Reuben Johnson. And they said, look, you're blessed to be here. This program, EOF, is terrific. It's going to help you, and I know your mother really appreciates it. And I had no idea what EOF was. I had one hell of a summer, Governor. I enjoyed being on the campus. Lynn, as you know, being in Montclair, close enough to my friends, we studied, but we also enjoyed ourselves. And as the summer was winding down and I had to come back to Newark, to the Central Ward, to reality where I live, not knowing what the next step was, I get a letter from the people at Montclair State talking about this state legislator who had put this program together. And they all expected us to know who that person was because it was beneficial both to all of the state colleges and kids in my neighborhood in particular. That's how I got to learn Tom Kean. Coming out of Newark 67, his relationship that he built over the years prior to being governor is what mattered. Because I worked for a mayor when you were running. Tom Cook was the mayor of East Orange at the time that you ran, and I was the director of human resources. And I will tell you, I had talked so much about Tom Kean before he ran for governor, it was hard for us as Democrats to say anything bad about Tom Kean. We talked about his educational proficiency and providing opportunity for people. And we talked about over the years in social conversation, political conversation, and that kind of thing. So when it came time for that race, the good news for me, I was not the mayor, so I didn't have to make the choice. But I could talk to the mayor. And I would say, Mayor, you're an educator. Tom Cook was a school teacher in Newark. And you appeal to the better part of the person, if you will. But what Tom Kean proved time and time again, and most of you in this room can attest to it, the ability to understand that race does matter. The ability to understand that the vociferous voice, we can come out loudly with things, and a lot of times we'll find ourselves creating a larger problem, but there was a calmness about Tom Kean. Always. There's a very calmness about him. So through my years of knowing him, and I started spending more time with him, I ran for county executive. Steve told that story at a future forum. Perhaps we'll talk about that race, very interesting race, about politics of inclusion, Governor. But in that race, I'll never forget, I went to see Governor Kean. And I, like all folks, you seek endorsement any way you can, John, and I figured, let me talk to him at least. And of course, like my party, we hang with the Democrats, and Tom did what he had to do. But I want you to know, whatever happened, I went into Livingston, New Jersey in a primary. This is a primary race I'm talking about. I went into Livingston, New Jersey in a primary, and I started talking about what we wanted to do in Essex County, the type of leadership and inclusion and so forth. And Steve, you'll recall this. Cardell Cooper won Livingston, New Jersey as an African American, and they forget, and that's forgotten about. And people say, well, that can't happen. Well, it just sort of reminds me of Tom Kean walking into Jersey City or into New Brunswick or East Orange or Newark and start talking about what the needs of the people were who lived there and what his belief in government was, Lenny. So that's how I got to know the governor. And then finally, I left the state, went to work for President Clinton. I watched the same skill he used as a legislator, as a governor, as a president of college, navigate those dangerous waters of the 9/11 Commission, and all of the fear on one side and all of the energy on the other side that says we must do something. He kept all of those folks together at one of the most difficult times in the nation. That's a testament to his leadership. I'm proud to call him a friend. I'm glad, Governor, to know that a guy you endorsed that didn't make out too good later on, that worked out okay. But the guy that we endorsed on our party side didn't make out too good, one of our county executives. But one thing that the governor always did, and I'll close, Lenny, and this is important to all of us at this table. In the spirit of politics now, Tom Kean is not only unique, but needed. In the spirit of that, because this nation is losing its way because people don't hear each other anymore. And that inclusion that we speak of now and how it came about, and many of us who benefited from it, is beginning to split the seams across America again. So race does matter, inclusion matters, and I don't look at him with an R, I look at him with my friend in front of his name. So, Governor, it's great to be here with you today. I traveled up from Virginia and very proud to be here. And Lenny, you started this with me in kind of conversation about the governor. And Rutgers, as you know, I'm a graduate of Rutgers, so it all fits for me today, and it's just a great opportunity to be part of it.
Oh, thanks, Cardell, and thanks for your powerful statements about the governor. In addition to the mayors, we've got some former legislators here today. I see Senator Stockman's here. We have someone who was both in the legislature, in the cabinet, chief counsel to the governor, and none other than Carrie Edwards. We're glad you're here. And Mike Cole, you also served as chief counsel and had to work directly with the legislature. Any of your comments on Tom's relationship with regard to inclusion in the legislature? Kerry?
My history with Tom goes back. I was an aide in the Senate in the early 70s, and Ray Bateman was president of the Senate, and Tom was Speaker of the Assembly at the time. And I used to sit in all the Senate hearings down next to Pete Thomas, who was the senator from Morris County that I worked for. And he was in the same law firm with me. And as a result of that, you tend to get a sense of feeling about the various leaders and the people that you meet. And Tom being one, Ray Bateman being another. You draw conclusions about their personalities and who they are and what they are. Like Mike Horn, I wound up on a ballot in Bergen County in 1977, running for the legislature to fill out the ballot because the control of the ballot looked like it was going to wind up for Ray Bateman. Now, Tom had asked me to support him, and Ray had asked me to support him. I had to make a judgment about why I chose one over the other. And I had some experience on a personal basis with both of them. And when you look at inclusion today in politics, you have to go back, and Tom particularly, you have to go back and look at the person. When you make a judgment, as I did at that point in time in picking between two really great leaders of the state, I think, in Ray Bateman and Tom Kean, there's got to be a reason why you pick one versus the other. And my knowledge about Tom Kean at the time was a person of inclusion, not a politician of inclusion, but a person who judged people as to who they were, what they were, and acted accordingly. Everything I saw him do prior to 1977 was one that fit right for me. It was people, it was who they were, a lot of the things that a lot of you have said here. So I made the unwise judgment of supporting Tom in 1977, and they decided in Bergen County to merge the lines together. I wound up winning, and he wound up losing. I never planned to be in the legislature. That was not part of my career goals. To tell you the truth, I was a government lawyer, and I thought I was doing local government, county government. That's what I did at the time. And I was a councilman by accident the same way. But I was there because I believed in Tom Kean, the person, the inclusive person of all people. And I believe that it was that personality that he demonstrated very clearly to all of us who knew him as legislators and in his early career. Also all those that knew him in between 77 and 1981. All those who knew and supported him in 1981. And as that personality of inclusion continued to grow, so did his political standing continue to grow. Now that's very difficult in the Republican Party and in a Republican primary, as many people could demonstrate back in that particular era. But Tom was that. It became clear to people who supported him, the differences between him were pointed out between him and, it was Jim Florio at the time, in 1981. And I never forget, Ken was writing all the position papers and I was rubber stamping them. And I had to travel with Tom periodically from place to place. We went down to the New Jersey Hospital Association, and there was a big auditorium there, and they would bring every healthcare personnel you could find into that room. And I bet there were 500 people there. We get there, we're supposed to be there at 1, we got there about 3:30. Which was also a typical day. Jim Florio had been there at about noon, and Tom was supposed to come at 1. Well, Jim Florio came in the back door of the auditorium, walked up to the podium, made a speech, and walked back out the back door and left. There was 1,000 people in that building if there was 2. And there were reporters all over the place looking for comments. We got there. Tom walked in the front door. It was 3:30. We were already 2.5 hours late in our schedule. He didn't make it to the podium until 4:15. he got on the podium. He made his speech. He took questions from everybody. He stepped off. The reporters were all over him. We're grabbing him and pulling him and yelling at him, you got to go. No, he wasn't going. And he said, there's a group of people who want to talk to me in a room in the back. In the back we go, and he spends about another 15 or 20 minutes talking to a group of people about health care and the real problems with health care that he saw them facing New Jersey. Now, that was the contrast, John, there's the difference between the Tom Kean and Jim Florio at the time. But it was really Tom Kean the person, Tom Kean the inclusive person, who wasn't going to be either rude, one, or two, not include everybody fairly and equally in the process. And he did that. In 1981, after the recount and all that was involved, I'm absolutely convinced that it was that personality, that inclusive personality, that won the election. We can talk about the strategies in the campaign and how great the ads were. I thought they stunk, but how great the ads were. But we ultimately won. We ultimately won because Tom had convinced a larger group of people about how inclusive he was. Give Tom Kean 4 years as president, as governor now, and he finally convinced the majority in every community in the state of New Jersey who Tom Kean was. Every town, we lost, I think, Roosevelt, if my memory serves me correctly. But we won every other community in New Jersey. We didn't win that, Tom did. The communication of what inclusion really means, and he coined it, somebody coined it, I don't know who did, the politics of inclusion, which was defined very dramatically from 1985 to this day, was really the personality and the values of Tom Kean as the people got to know him. 4 years as governor, the entire state got to know him. They understood what inclusion really was. And in my opinion, it is the reason why the entire administration was a success, because everybody felt a part of the system. They felt fairly treated in the system. They felt their causes were fairly treated. And I believe that happened in the legislature. I believe that happened in the campaigns. And ultimately, we celebrate that today, I think, in this meeting as something that's become a byword in politics, not only in New Jersey, but across this country, which is the politics of inclusion. And it is Tom Kean and his personality and his values. Forgetting his stand on any issue. And as I've listened to everybody here today, it only reinforces that belief in my mind, that it was the man and the person and his values as to why all of us are here today, but it's why he won every community in the state of New Jersey in 1985, and the national birth of politics of inclusion happened.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks very much. Thanks for being here. Let's start with the Senate with Senator Stockman, and we'll move to the Assembly with Assemblyman Orengo.
Governor, I and my family are indebted to you for many good things that you've done in public life, and I'm not going to waste our time enumerating those. I sitting here, I was hoping I wouldn't speak till much later. I've come to recognize that you are an extraordinarily talented politician. But I have problems because Dick Coffey was one of my key leaders in my county, and he was very emphatic in saying that I was a lousy politician. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. In fact, it may or may not be appropriate, but I'll share with you a story about me before I contribute whatever I can, whatever small way I can to this session. I was in the Senate, and John Russo was Senate President. He cleared the room. John Lynch couldn't help me the other day on the issue, but there was a tough issue, obviously. It was rare to exclude all the staff and all, and the theory was what was about to be said would
never leave that room. Don't hold your breath. John stood up and he said, we can do A or we can do B. A is the right thing to do. A is the decent thing to do. A is the good thing to do. We have to do B. And if anybody in the room quotes me, I will call them a liar. Well, he took the gut out of me. I raised my hand. I argued for A, and it was quickly put aside, and we did B. That's not why I'm sharing this story with you. Why I'm sharing it is because alongside of me was a senator, Democrat. You all know him well. He's still in the Senate. And he turned to me and he said, let me ask you something. How the fuck did you get here? That's a true story. And we're sticking with facts. My problem with Tom Kean is I think he got Abbott v. Burke wrong, and I think he got Mount Laurel wrong. But having said that, and having looked around, and having lived well beyond our joint time, I don't think there's any doubt that he was sensitive to and anxious to contribute to the issue of minorities in public life. I still, nevertheless, am kind of somber and probably too serious because I come out of Trenton and I've been recently pulled into an effort to try and do something about the Trenton public school system. Because what's happening in Trenton, my particularly known urban area, is that young minds with capacities beyond any of our dreams, with pliability and potential, and with innocence, which I don't have any share of in my time in life now, they're really being torn up and thrown away. And I don't blame Tom Kean for that, because I don't think his successors have necessarily got the right answer to it. But when we think urban areas and where we are, I'm sorry to sound so serious, but I've come to like Tom Kean more and more, and it's obvious everybody around this table loves him, and I think understandably so. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. That's great. Jose, you were sort of unique coming out of the Assembly, being a Republican.
I'm a Republican in Hudson County and a Hispanic, and thanks to Tom Kean, the best education that I received in my life was to serve with Tom Kean, because good policy is good politics. And if you're honest and you mean well, no matter where you are, and let me tell you, you can listen to me well, I'm in Hudson County, no matter where you are, you will survive. And even till today, all the Hispanics that are now in the legislation or any place in the federal government from New Jersey, they own that luxury thanks to Tom Kean. Because if it wasn't for Tom Kean, that picked me to run because I didn't know really what I was doing. I just was there like a spring break. I was 26 years old. I had some ideas about the legislation, but really I learned more about the legislation after I lost than when I was there. And if it wasn't for his vision, his compassion, his integrity, I don't think we have what we had as a Hispanic community in this state. He understood what our problems were. He had an open mind. He didn't care if you were a Republican or Democrat, but he was there to help. He was there to stand the hand. He was there to give you a break. When they talk about second chance, the champion of second chances in the state is Tom Kean. The champion to open the doors. You know, always I felt like I walked into the governor's office like I was walking to my house. I got spoiled because then I realized that that was a luxury. You can't do that to all the governors. But I can say that Tom Kean is like, is really emotional because I always say that he was my political father. And I appreciate just the years that I spent with you. And I'm not a Reagan Republican. I'm a Tom Kean Republican. God bless you, Governor.
Jose, tell us, how did the governor penetrate the Hispanic community in Hudson County?
Well, the Hispanic community, the governor basically was in Union City and West New York and North Bergen every single month. Basically every 3 months he visited, he walked the streets, he talks to the merchant, he understood the necessities, he was very supportive of the urban policies, he was very supportive of the minority business. He started to include, he created Hispanic Affairs in DCA and the Department of Community Affairs. That was like a great success because now we knew that we have somebody that had the governor's ears and could have worked with the Hispanic community. He was the person that no matter what problem, like for example, we have the longest Cuban political prisoner. He brought it into the governor's office. He gave it a book, Montero Duque. I don't know if you remember that, Governor. That was 1987. And he was good with the Cuban community. He united the Cuban community with the Puerto Rican community. He didn't care if you were a citizen or not. He always looked at what's good for the community. And that was the success. The success of Tom Kean started before 1985. We elected a Hispanic freeholder in Hudson County that not even knew how to speak English. He introduced himself as, you know my person, Octavio Alfonso, remember? and we had to have somebody in the Board of Freeholders, and we had to point up or down, that way he could vote yes or no. But Tom Kean even accomplished that. I remember when I walked into the caucus, we're going to elect who's going to be the Speaker of the House and the majority leader, and it's Chuck Harwick and Chuck Hatay, and I'm Jose Arango. Was I think somebody named Albon, or that was an assemblyman from I don't remember where, and then me. I was the Spanish kid, I say Chuck, and they told me, vote for Chuck. So I look at Chuck Hatay, and I look to Chuck Harwick, and I say, all right, let me go with the Anglo-Saxon. I voted for Chuck Harwick last speaker. I voted for the Italian for majority leader. So and then I say, forget about my name, Jose Arango. I'm Chuck Arango. But it was a great experience. I can say that, I will not change my opportunity that you gave me for anything in my life. Some people, are lucky. I think I'm the luckiest Spanish guy in the state, thanks to Tom Kean.
Thanks, Jose. Good. Let me get Mike Cole first with this, and then I'm going to go back to Mike Horn with legislature.
Thanks, Leonard. I guess I'm the product of inclusion, too. I was a independent hangover from the Byrne administration when the governor became governor. And he allowed me in that first term to play a role in some of the more significant legal issues that confronted the administration at the time. And then, of course, in the second term, he did me the great honor of inviting me to be his chief counsel. And I have to tell you, I had the time of my life in that job. Carrie, I think, will similarly say there was no better job in the world. But in that job is when I learned about the governor's feelings on really inclusion. He had a belief that government is authority, and authority only can work if it has the respect of who's being governed. And he encouraged, demanded that we search high and low for minorities, for the fill prosecutors and judicial appointments. And it's a lot easier to do today because there are more graduates and more practicing lawyers today who are minorities. But in those days, you really had to search high and low. And I can remember finding some people. I found a Republican woman, Hispanic, once, and I was thrilled, and he was thrilled. You can just see he was so happy that he was able to do that. We had a sense of pride among all those of us who worked in the Kean administration. We were very proud of him. We were proud of him 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We enjoyed doing what we were doing because we sort of had a guiding principle. Whatever was the right thing to do, that ultimately was going to be in play at the end of the day. So my memories of the governor in inclusion are that he was a great human being. He saw people as needing to be part of the process for the process to work. And I'm so happy I had the opportunity to be.
Mike Horn, both legislator and a cabinet member, and I'll move over to some other cabinet colleagues, Bob Huey, in a second. Also, if Ken wants to add anything in terms of inclusion, working with the governor from the cabinet perspective. Mike.
Well, what I wanted to do was pick up on the Assemblyman's comment that good policy is good politics, and during that first term, the governor not only walked the walk, he talked the talk. I remember when I was state treasurer, the director of the Division of Investment called me in a panic and said, I got to see you, I got to see you. So I came over to the State House and sat down and talked. I said, what's the problem? He said, well, you know, there's a bill sponsored by an assemblyman from Essex County that provides that the state has to divest investments in South Africa. He said, that would be terrible, that would be terrible. And there's a rumor the governor may support it. And I was aware of the bill. So anyway, I went over to see the governor, and governor, and as treasurer, of course, you have blinders. You're supposed to have blinders. You're supposed to maximize the return to the treasury, because that's your job as treasurer. But needless to say, Governor was persuasive, and I eventually testified in favor of the South African divestiture. So that was, in my mind, one of a number of those types of issues during that first term where he, by policy, earned the trust of minority communities as well as anyone else who would be fair-minded.
Lenny, if I can just jump in. Mike, I was the county freeholder who sponsored the initial legislation on divestment in South Africa. And when that issue came up, it was very clear that, you know, it was just sort of all the cards on the table. And the governor, once again, and you're right, it's a testament to where his belief systems are and what's important. So I just want you to know, I started the firestorm that created the assembly person to raise it. And there were people who took bets. And Steve, I don't remember. There were folks who took bets that Tom Kean would not agree with that. And it makes you wonder whether it was some was pushed, you know, politically to see what was going to happen. But once again, I just thought it was a testament of Mike, as you point out, being close to the governor, knowing the business side and all those things, that Tom Kean made that decision.
Tony?
J&J was very much at the forefront in fighting that issue, basically because J&J was doing a lot of good things in South Africa. They were hiring South Africans, and they had all the pharmaceutical industry as a whole came together and actually went down to talk to the governor about this, because back in that time, there was no time limit for signing a bill. I mean, the governor could hold that bill on his desk, and it could go, I think it was, now it's 45 days. I think you have to do it, but not then. So he had that bill sitting on his desk, and it just, everybody started lobbying, everybody got together and started campaigning against it. In the pharmaceutical industry as a whole, it was really strong and very active because they felt they were doing good things for people in South Africa. It was one speech by Prime Minister Botha at the time that came, when he came out, it was in August or something like that, July or August. He came out and said, I'm not backing down on apartheid. And I remember calling Tom because I knew I was, because all the pharmaceuticals were hiring me to do that.
You did all right in those days, didn't you, Tom?
You know, they thought, hey, they had the in, but, you know, I knew this was trouble. And he said, you know, Tony, there's a point in time when you got to say enough is enough. And I knew, so I didn't say anything. I said, oh, okay. So, and he signed the bill. But it was a very, very difficult issue. I can't tell you how strong it was, how all of the business community, as well as people out there as a whole, there were a lot of countervailing forces that were at work here, and they were all centered on him. And he let it happen, and he kept it going because he knew he wanted to sign it, but he was he had this industry that he had to preserve. He had to make sure it stayed in this state, and he didn't want to. They were doing a lot for New Jersey and still do a lot for New Jersey. So there were all these countervailing forces. It was a major, major decision, and it was only his decision because the staff around it, I mean, politically, it was just, Jerry talked about A and B. Well, this was A, but we were all saying do B. Just like Senator Russo. No, we understand, Jerry.
Lenny, just fill in on that a little bit. We know one of the major calls I got not to sign that bill was from the White House. They said you'd be making foreign policy if you signed the bill, and governors shouldn't do that. So I listened.
Good. Let me, Bob Huey was, of course, our great DEP commissioner. Let me say before you get started, let me set the context for this, and I think my other cabinet colleagues will agree to this. The two positions you did not want under Tom Kean were to be the DEP commissioner or the commissioner of education, because those were the two that you knew he absolutely was most interested in and was going to really just come to know all the details about. The rest of us, we can go in there and kind of shade it the way we wanted it and hope to get the outcome we wanted. But if you were DEP or education, you had trouble. And one of our great troubleshooters was Bob Huey.
Thanks, Lenny. I don't know what you call it. I guess inclusion is the topic of the day, so we use that. But I was helping Tony write something about Tom. Everybody's writing about Tom now. He's 75 this year. Congratulations, Governor. And if there was a Lifetime Achievement Award for being nice, that's what makes Tom Kean. I mean, you start out with probably, in my experience, and clearly from the kind of people we have around this table today, he's just the nicest guy that's ever worked in public life. Now, that doesn't mean he wasn't smart, doesn't mean he wasn't political, doesn't mean he wasn't the savviest guy I ever worked with, but it starts out with being nice. And the other unwavering principle with Tom, I've taught a lot of seminars since that administration, and you can't teach people how to do this stuff. It just doesn't happen. It comes intuitively. But it's just not black and white or Republican and Democrat. As we sit here today, I had a great relationship with Jerry when we were in, our administration was in, a great relationship with John Lynch that lasted for years. The politics were different then. We got along politically. We worked on policy together. We agreed when we were going to fight and when we weren't going to fight. And one of the reasons why that was possible, one of Tom's other characteristics, was he never celebrated victories and he never suffered defeats. It was always, okay, let's move on to the next issue. And the third thing was, I've made this a principle of everything I've ever taught in public administration, if you want to know something about a guy or a woman, watch the way they treat little people. Everybody at the top gets treated well. Nobody at this table gets treated shabby on the way in here today. Everybody assumes you're somebody. But it's the way you treat secretaries, administrative assistants, security guards, janitors. Well, I've spent a lot of time with Tom Kean. In a lot of strange places. He treats everybody the same. Now, when you treat everybody the same, it doesn't matter whether it's race or politics or age, everybody's inclusive. So that's the basic principle, I think, of working with Tom. He was the easiest guy to work for in the world because he had the patience to let you do what you wanted to do. He had the patience to let you make a mistake. And that's the last thing with Tom Kean that I'll share with you, at least for right now. Tom was a great guy to work for because, you know, when things got down to push, he always said, do the right thing. You know, our theory was if you're going to err on the side of God. And when you're done, apologize. Well, you know, I made a mistake. I've never seen anybody get shot for that, in or out of politics. And for some reason that escapes me, people have lost the ability to do that in the last 25 years. Nobody ever wants to admit they made a mistake. We did it on a weekly basis. You know, you walk into Tom and you go, boy, I blew that one. Okay, maybe we'll do better next time. I think the attitude of the Kean years, as we've all seen grow, all started with the fact that we worked for a guy who respected everybody, who treated everybody the same, and had a terminal case of niceness.
Thanks, Bob. I'm going to throw off the hat of moderator for a second and just put some comments in of my own. And I would say to you, to some of you, the minority businessmen and political leaders and civil rights leaders, get ready. Hopefully I'll be able to put a little context to it. Nancy had mentioned that Tom, after the first election in '81, wanted 25% of the minority vote in '85, and we figured that would be enough to secure re-election. Everything. I was fortunate enough, I had come back from Africa in 1980 and had started to work in Tom's campaign, and I think I used to show up. That was kind of the main thing, and actually knew Tom's brother more than I knew Tom at the time and everything, and then luckily we got to know each other and like each other, and next thing I knew, I was the Commissioner of Energy for the state of New Jersey, and one of the things that Tom charged me with right after that was to set about that we were going to put in motion an apparatus that were going to bring minorities to the Republican Party. And he gave me as a colleague, we talked about Bob Franks, and you know how much we all like Bob. Well, he gave me a cigar-chomping, Ocean County State Chairman, Frank Holman, that we all remember. And between Ray Durkin isn't here today, but I know Steve Adubato and John Lynch Cardell and everybody knows, between Ray Durkin and Frank Holman, I think every deal in the world was cut. You didn't have you didn't have to worry about moving it through the legislature because those two had it figured out, and they were one-upping each other and having just the greatest time, having 4-hour lunches, drinking and smoking cigars. And so at any rate, I got to work very closely with Frank and in terms of putting together this minority platform. And I think the underpinnings of that excuse me, were a fairness in governing, and that civil rights were to be upheld and actively pursued. There was going to be an activist orientation. You just couldn't sit back as a Republican and expect that minorities were going to vote for you. And also that minorities were going to be full participants within the government. Now, as we know, this was the time of the Reagan administration, and so there wasn't certainly any national movement going on of Hispanics and African Americans, you know, particularly supporting that. So we were working against that particular tide. We had a rocky start. I got my position. And I would say one of the things that we did, and I know Tony was instrumental in this, to be honest with you, when I got to be Commissioner of Energy, the only thing I knew about energy was how to turn the lights on and off. And everything. I didn't know anything else about it. And I remember Nick Brady called me and said, Tom wants you to be Commissioner of Energy. And I said, oh. So I said, well, Nick, I don't know anything about energy. He said, don't worry about it. You learn on the job. And everything. So, but the point was that there would have been positions that I would have been more comfortable in going in. But Tom wanted to appoint minorities to non-traditional positions. And I know Tony and he had discussed this. Then we had a couple of setbacks right away with this platform because he appointed a minority commissioner of education. And there were problems. He had to withdraw. Before we got Mary Singletary as head of the Division on Women. He had nominated another woman, minority woman, to be there, and we found out there were some problems with those degrees. So we had a couple of very visible setbacks. Well, then somehow the formula for success started working. Everybody has talked about his accessibility. And I can tell you, I used to take Tom once a month up to the black ministers up at St. James AME Church up on Martin Luther King Boulevard now. And we would go in and I remember I'd ride up with him. I'd get him briefed on what the issues for the day were going to be and everything. And he'd have the car stop and he'd think of some passage that he remembered from St. Mark's School. And he'd go in and he'd give the passage, and the ministers loved it. And of course, we always had B.F. Johnson, who was the most venerable of the black ministers, and time was still not only living but still going strong, and he would be there and embrace him. And next thing you knew, we started building support with the ministers. We took them to the NAACP, United Negro College Fund, Black Issues Conference, also reaching out, meeting with various Democratic groups and everything. So we got him in places where, you know, he could be seen. And once again, this factor we all keep talking about, likability. Everybody liked Tom Kean. So on one hand, in Washington, you got Brad Reynolds, who was head of the Civil Rights Division, trying to roll back the Voting Rights Act, many aspects of it. On the other hand, we got this thing moving in New Jersey, where we're reaching out and touching new frontiers. Jerry mentioned Shirley Tolentino. I remember when that appointment came up. Yes, first-time minority woman appointed. There was never a black judge south of Trenton. We nominated Elliott Hurd to that position, and the minority community in southern New Jersey rallied around that. Essex County, Herb Tate, first black prosecutor. So that what we were attempting to show were rights, and that there was going to be equal access, and that people were going to be allowed to participate. Not only as me being a commissioner of energy, but all of a sudden we had our first black commissioner of the Port Authority. He had wanted to be here today, Hank Henderson, and everything. So first appointment ever there. So there was this support, in a sense, for minorities in non-traditional positions. We mentioned South African sanctions, but also, and Malcolm Dunn can certainly speak to this, I got a phone call. I didn't know anything about it, but Malcolm had been on a contract at the Port Authority. He was the low bidder, and but he didn't get the contract. And I guess it was Kerry or somebody on his staff picked it up and brought it out to the governor's attention, and brought it to the governor's attention. Was Gus, didn't it? Brought it to the governor's attention that that had occurred, and I got the phone call saying that the governor was going to hold up the minutes of the Port Authority, wasn't going to sign them until he got a reasonable explanation as to why Malcolm Dunn had not gotten that contract. We talked about sanctions, but also New Jersey was the first state to have a Martin Luther King holiday. And not only do we have it, and Ibrahim, I'm going to call on you. We have a great lady who's I know a very close friend also of Senator Stockman, Edith Savage Jennings, who was the one that was closest with the King family in New Jersey, very close with both Martin and Coretta. And she had wanted to be here today, and unfortunately she's been hospitalized, but sent her godson to read a statement about her feelings about Tom Kean and inclusion. But I guess the point is that we put together a platform which called for opportunity, called for participation, and called for rights. In politics, what we did was we had a number of Democrats that supported us. I named Earl Harris, former Newark Council President, the great Connie Woodruff, right here from Newark, and extremely powerful. Edith had been a Democrat her entire time, and one of the things we did, Harold Edwards and David Byrd are here. We had the Republican Progressive Association. Mary Singletary was involved with that. And one of the things we said, all right, you want these appointments? You're going to be a Republican. You're coming over with us. So we both reached out. And Hank Henderson, for example, he got on the Port Authority, but he got appointed as a Republican. So we attempted to put some discipline into the operation. So it was both a reaching out in terms of, but also attempting to bring in some new blood within the Republican Party. And I think that one of the greatest things that happened, and it had never happened before, and I don't think it happened afterward, was when Edith, through Edith's influence and her love of Tom Kean, and she reached out and got Coretta to come in and endorse Tom Kean. And I'll just tell a quick story about that, because it almost turned out to be one of the most disastrous days of my life. I was in charge of putting together this whole operation, and lo and behold, on that very same day, most of us know Phil Matalucci, who was the Cape May County Republican chair. Phil had won the lottery. So they were going to present him with the lottery check at 2 o'clock in the State House, the same time I'm bringing Coretta in. So, at any rate, I got a hold of Peggy Howard and Greg Stevens, and I said, well, wait a minute here now. Who's going to be on the front page? Is it going to be the governor with Mrs. King, or is it going to be Phil getting this check as Republican county chairman with these millions? Greg Stevens went through the roof. The State House dome almost flew off, and I can tell you, I don't know where Phil got that check, but it wasn't in the State House. And Coretta came over and endorsed Tom, and I can tell you this. Tom talks about receiving phone calls, but I do know that Mrs. King received a phone call from Teddy Kennedy asking her not to do it. And she said that no, that this man had stood up, and that this was one time that she was going to go over to the other side and she was going to endorse Tom Kean, which I thought was, in a sense, the ultimate tribute here to the politics of inclusion. So I think on the part of minority voters, it was first, well, who is this guy? Then it became, well, you know, he's not so bad. And then the third thing was they were won over. And so this 25% was out the window, and Roger Stone, who was Tom's campaign consultant, and Frank Holman had a little bet. Frank bet them that they would get at least 50% of the vote. Roger Stone said it was soft. It would never hold up. So they bet that someone had to kiss the other one's rear in the window at Macy's on Thanksgiving Day if he got more than 50%. And when he got to 62%, Frank picked up the phone, but the bet was never paid off. So I will stop with that. But Ibrahim, you're here, and Edith is certainly one of the first ladies of our state, and we're very sorry that she is ill today. But do you have some comments from her?
Yes, thank you so much, Lenny. And to Governor Kean, I am deeply honored and to be here today. This is going to add more years to my life because part of being healthy is being happy. And on behalf of my godmother, she asked me to do this, and I was highly honored. She spoke to Lenny. She is now hospitalized. She is now going on 87, going on 40. You know, and she have, over the last 15 years, before I read her statement, I'll only take a few moments, Lenny, she has talked about Governor Kean as I sat on the foot of her bed, as I go and pick her up to take her to events. And she always say to me, she says, you know, baby, he would make a great president. She constantly said that. Her humbleness and her commitment to doing what's right is a reflection of what I hear today in the legacy and the great works of the Honorable Governor Tom Kean. And I'm so happy to be here because sometimes you feel that there's no way out. There are many good things that is happening today that we don't get a chance to, you know, to be here to witness this. And lastly, before I read her statement, I wish our young people were here. I wish students were here to see and hear about the legacy of Governor Kean. And the other person who told me to bring you his best is a young man that you selected as the commissioner of the Athletic Control Board. Just recently, he's been inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. And he told me, and also to Carrie Edwards, he's told me to give you his best. Now he's with Joe Louis, Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Robinson, etc. And Governor Kean, he says, it's due to you seeing what type of person he was. And let me just read this to you. This is from my godmother. Even in her sick bed, she says, Ibrahim, you got to get Lenny. You got to call Lenny. So I didn't have Lenny's number, so I called David down in Maryland. And then we started networking. She says, even in her sickness, she says, you have to be there because this is important to me. And let me just read to you, ladies and gentlemen, what she has said. Since the founding of the United States in 1776, the issue of inclusion has been a central political issue posed at the core of every political struggle dating back to the writing of the Declaration of Independence and the adoption of the Constitution. The rights of African Americans and our inclusion in all phases of political and economic life of this nation has been a struggle. Despite our participation in all of the nation's wars since the Revolution, and the strength and the importance of our manpower as slaves, we were denied citizenship and all benefits enjoyed by others. The Civil War, under the leadership of President Abraham Lincoln, laid the basis for the constitutional amendments needed to start us on the path of inclusion. The Republican Party was at the helm and included leaders such as Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, and Sojourner Truth. Along the way, the nation and the party lost sight of inclusion as a goal. As a young man, Tom Kean believed in inclusion. As a graduate and student of Columbia University in New York City, he was a founding member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, co-founded by Dr. Martin Luther King and Reverend E. Lowry in 1957. When Tom Kean became governor of the state of New Jersey, he proved to be a statesman who understood the history of the nation and embraced the Enlightenment legacy of the past. His 8 years were marked by programs that brought minority and women businesses to the economic table and to leadership positions in his cabinet. He was the first governor in the nation to officially divest all of New Jersey's own stock from corporations operating in the Republic of South Africa. He was the first governor to establish the Martin Luther King Jr. Federal Holiday Commission, and the first governor to establish in the United States the Martin Luther King Commemorative Commission. Governor Kean's selection as the first chairman of the 9/11 Commission, his service on the Endowment Democracy, the U.S. Presidential Advisory Commission, and on President Clinton's One American Initiative shows his willingness to serve and the high regard for which he held. Those of us who work with him know him as a wise, kind, and compassionate friend. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you, Ray. Please, wish Edith a speedy recovery, and all of us that know Edith love her, and just, I'll tell you, few people I've never said no to in life, but when Edith calls and she wants something, I always say yes. It's easier.
Thank you, Lenny.
Yeah, and please give my love to Edith.
I most certainly
She is a great woman and somebody I've really enjoyed knowing. I'll say, by the way, when Coretta told me that day that Ted Kennedy had called and asked her not to come, I said, "What did you say?" And she said, "I said Martin would have." He said he didn't say anything else.
That's great. Malcolm, you almost didn't get a contract. Tell us about it.
Based on my training, I say thank you. Thank you for the Dunn family, for Dunn & Sons, for the state of New Jersey. And thank you for knowing or being known by Gus Heinenberg and John Lynch. In approximately 77, 78, in 70, we found a company here in New Jersey, my brother and I, Danny Dunn, at High Street in Newark. And we created a blue-collar temporary employment agency, and thereafter we migrated into a janitorial maintenance firm. As such, we became eligible and became qualified with the Port Authority as one of their minority contractors, specializing in the physical maintaining of their plants at night or whatever time they had to be cleaned. Having performed that work under the supervisory operational skills with my brother Dan, and those of us left in the office looking for opportunities, kind of worked with Al Robinson at the Port Authority to encourage them to open up the door wider. Well, they opened it up for the Port Authority bus terminal, which was at that time about a $7 to $8 million contract being let for 6 years. Because we at that time had been doing a contract with 32BJ, the infamous union in New York, led by Mr. Kelly, who are now, I believe, stepping down as the head of the AFL-CIO. At that time, he had been the head of 32BJ. We had a contract with him in Brooklyn at Fort Hamilton, and we had another contract at the Port Authority Police Operations Building in Queens. When they put out the bid for the Port Authority bus terminal in New York, they, in trying to protect the union's rights, had wrote in the contract that, the Bible, that responding parties would have to pay similar wages for similar work in the city of New York / state of New York. Well, we had two contracts, one in Queens and one in Brooklyn, that we were paying wages that were acceptable to the Army in one instance and the Port Authority in another. And I thought to myself, how dare them tell us what to pay in New York? First of all, I'm from New York, from Brooklyn specifically, and I just thought that they were not being accepted of the capabilities of our firm. And so I lamented, is the right word, to Gus Heiningberg. And he took me to Trenton. And Governor, the one thing I learned after that meeting that day, and I'll tell you what happened, you know what happened, but this man gives respect to everyone he meets. And he has a very attentive, because it was Gus, me, and him in the stateroom. Nobody else, no staff, no note taker, excuse me. And he listened to me. And I told him, Governor, we had won the contract by quoting wages that we felt were acceptable in New York, but they were not satisfactory to 32BJ. And that the contract had about 210 men, of which 10 came from New Jersey, and 190 some came from New York. I told him that I had gone to the Encyclopedia of Occupational Titles in the library, and I had found out that that the jobs being distributed at the Port Authority were 50 jobs, 26, 24 in New Jersey, New York. Told him that I went back and read the formative laws that created the Port Authority, and it seems that parity was the most important thing in we states addressing our transportation problems. And they have done a great job. But I'd like to say, because of Governor Kean's insistence that they do what they say they're going to do, and in our specific case, when I pointed out that I committed to him that New Jersey would get our share of the jobs, just get me the contract. And he said, I'll think about it. He said, perhaps I can make you a Republican. I said, no, I already have a brother. I already have a brother who's a Republican. That's enough out of this family. And so he commenced through this gentleman here, who I just haven't seen in maybe 10 or 15 years, Todd Carligai. This is the guy you put in charge for me to communicate with. And I had to educate Todd about the procurement process. The Port Authority was very embryonic at that time. They were doing a good job, but it was not an expanding job. And this man wanted the state to expand its opportunities to everyone. It wasn't about black or gender. It wasn't about that. I felt that, first of all, I have respect for Gus, and he doesn't take me to any losers. And so when he set me down with this man, and I saw this man, he reminded me of an old teacher in school, interested in me and my problem. But I tried to make the problem a New Jersey problem, which it was. I'm from Brooklyn, but I noticed that the Port Authority was not even sending out the procurements to Jersey contractors. And so this man said he would look into it, and he did. As Gus will embellish, and someone else has alluded to, he vetoed the minutes, Todd, for 9 months in a row until they gave us the contract. I knew we were on solid ground because I had the other two contracts. What they did wrong was put in the contract that you pay similar wages for similar work in the city of New York. You meant the borough of Manhattan, because that's where 32B operated, J operated in Brooklyn. They formed together and they tried to put it all over the same city and tried to impose it on New Jersey. And we decided that that was not fair enough, and I went to this gentleman. Meeting my teacher, and all of us know when you go to your teacher, she knows what you're capable, or he knows what you're capable of, knows what effort you're putting out. He didn't know that at this time, but I tried to impress him that I had done my homework, and I would not ask someone of that stature, with that power,
to intercede on our behalf unless I knew what I was talking about. We then were awarded the contract. They dallied for 9 months, giving it to the incumbent. And we got the contract and we performed. And I'm proud to say that under my brother's leadership, we realized a 97% subjective evaluation of our performance at the Port Authority for 5 years and 3 months. With that performance, I went to the governor and said, the 9 months, they got the 9 months. We want the 9 months back. He said, let me check. He checked and saw that we had performed. He said, give him his 9 months. And we got the 9 months. And then, as Tom Kean and my God put it, we bid again for 6 more years. And we were notified that we did not win. Tom Kean did what he could. God did better. He said that the second responder put a decimal in the wrong place. And he was knocked out. And we were the second. And we had that contract for another 6 years. And then after that, somebody employed the same tactic which we thought the union had protected themselves against, and they bid again. And they used a less than union wage. Okay? We paid prevailing wage, but it wasn't with a union contract. But going back, and we first started the job, the union struck us. And of course, the governor would like to know what happened at that time, and we assured her that we had it under control. Went back home to Brooklyn and hired a few people to help us withstand the union, and we did. And the rest was history. We stayed there 14 months, 14 years, 3 months, and 2 days. Ending our contract was from August 1983 till January 31st, 1996. I want to say that I would not have reached the levels in life that God blessed me here in New Jersey. We came here with 4 kids, had 2 of us here. My brother came here with children, and he and I and the whole family moved to Jersey. We found a place where we were welcomed. And I was welcomed by the best greeter of all, a Republican governor who, I might remind you, gave, because I remember I saw 2 speeches, his and Obama's. And I was never been more impressed with people making, a person making a speech at a convention, at the National Convention, one for Republicans and one for Democrats. I say your hearts are both the same. Your skin is different. Your character is both the same. And I can say that under your leadership, Jersey prospers. And yes, as Mr. Cooper said, we need you bad in this country. Because I've always said, and I think I said that day, don't give away this country before we as blacks have a chance to help you run it. And that's what we did. And again, I'm honored to be here. And I've never troubled you again, but I got another trouble for you when we finish. But it was because of that and the diligence and the guidance of Todd, okay? And later on, after we had the contract, John Lynch helping me, and we helping him get elected from the Plainfield side. It was, I didn't have the benefit of going to college, but the best teacher I've ever had, the best professor, was Tom Kean, because he showed me that the things that I've been taught by my parents and practiced in doing our work. When we named I tricked my brothers and sisters in naming our company after our father. Everybody thought he was the creator. No, me, my brother and my sister were the creator of Dunn & Sons, but I felt that if I put our dad's name on it, they wouldn't screw up. And they didn't. And Jersey, the Port Authority now tells me no one else has ever come through. And excuse me, teacher, I learned from then. And presently now, one of my firms feeds the future generals of the United States Army at West Point. And we've been doing so for about 8 years. And the standards that you helped me solidify are the standards that that company operates for. I also want to say that, as again, when the company was operation, I was in the inside and bidding and sales and marketing, and my brother did the operations. So those operational attainments, those standards that the Port Authority gave to us, stood us in good stead and inspired me to go on and do the same thing at West Point. I want you to know, too, that having Gus in Newark at that time was helpful, having Lenny Coleman and the names that you've named of people I've forgotten about. Willie Brown on the South African stance you took. Rick Taylor in Plainfield when he went down to Trenton after you had established the enterprise zone, and they gave it to one city. At the time we were simple, 201, 609. And we came back, we were denied. And I said, Rick, go back and tell them anybody, with the governor and the legislator, we are going to raise hell. 609. In those days, sorry, you pick one from the north and one from the south in the original days of the enterprise zone. And they had picked two from the south. And the 609, I said, that ain't gonna fly. And Plainfield was put in the enterprise zone. It has been a great financial help to Plainfield. And I need you to talk to this guy because he's considering messing with that. And
Thanks,
that is our money in your hands being held for us to do things that help ourselves. Okay?
Thanks.
But thank you very much.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you for sending us up.
Thanks, Malcolm. I can just remember when that contract came up and when the governor did not sign those notes, those minutes, that the reverberation went all around the minority community in this state. We're going to have lunch in just a couple of minutes and get on. I know this afternoon there's going to be much more on minority business, but before we break, just a couple of minutes from somebody in that corner over there, which is the minority Republican corner, Mr. Dunn, Mr. Byrd, Mr. Edwards, who would like to speak for a couple of minutes about minority Republicans under the governor's term.
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Len, and thanks, Governor. I was a young man then. I was a young man immersed in the Newark South Ward and Central Ward's Democratic politics on my way up through the Young Dems. And Len came and recruited me. I thought, I didn't know what Len was talking about and where we were going. And for a while there, my family wouldn't speak to me. When I started, I told them I was going to become a Republican. I'm following Len Coleman. At any event, it worked itself out, and it was the best thing I've ever done in my life. I've been able to touch so many other people and advise them that America is a two-party system, and we have many friends and people who look at our issues and will understand our issues and help us. A few names that you mentioned were just great to me. Frank Holman. When I first met Frank Holman, I said, Len, like, who's this guy? I thought he was first I thought he was a farmer from, but he had the big cigar, but he was a straight shooter. He was just honest and gave me so much practical information. It was incredible. And after Frank, John Renner. John Renner was just great to us as well. I think about him often as we make moves today. But I thank you for including me, including us, and it empowered us. It empowered our group. We started the Concerned Black Republicans of New Jersey after RPA. We were their outreach street guys, and it's still kind of working today, but we really miss you. And the current leadership needs to look at the mold that you made, look at that plan and follow it. But we thank you, and thanks again, Len.
Governor, good to see you today. And Len, I appreciate you inviting me up here. I drove up from Prince George's County, Maryland last night so I could be here. One of the things that I want to tell you is I want to thank you because the people that you surrounded yourself with, people like Len and other folks, gave me the opportunity early in my career to be where I am today. My dad used to be an aide to the mayor of this city. He had a long-time friendship with Lenny, and I benefited from that, and I'm grateful for that. And Lenny has been a mentor to me all along my career. I grew up idolizing and admiring people like Gus Henningberg and other people in this city when I was growing up and coming through. One of the things during the inclusion years, as I'll call them, is that in 1984, and I too, my family moved out of Newark to Ocean County, met Frank, got to know Frank after he became party chairman, and soon after, when I moved from the county to the state, Frank sent me over to Ken Marin over at the Department of Insurance for a short period of time, and then I realized that I needed to go and, almost like you, Governor, when I read I actually took your book, I went to the library and got your book back out to prepare myself. I decided I needed to go back and get a master's degree, and when I told Ken that I was going to go and get my master's degree, he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said it was probably one of the best decisions I was making. But during the re-election campaign, I was down at that time, it was called Glassboro State College. And if you remember, one of the big issues that you were pushing was the independence of the universities at that time, so they would have, the word that was used was autonomy. And you had a couple of people on the ballot that Frank had recruited that I was working with down there, who some people in this room may remember. He went on to become speaker, a guy named Jack Collins and Gary Stoltrager. And they unseated, during that re-election campaign, they unseated a 12-year incumbent to take that, and it was unbelievable. But what I wound up doing was I wound up writing my master's thesis on that campaign and how Jack Collins, who had been a very popular basketball coach, all he had ever run for was a school board position, and how he won that seat over a 12-year incumbent, of which you later made a judge, Marty Pankow. So again, what the point that I'm making is that all during that period of time, I had the opportunity through your folks, your administration, through the support of Lenny and others, to really get my career going to where I am today. And some of the things that your folks, that you had come up with, are things that I still carry today. And I want to point a couple of things out. One is that 29 years after you proposed it, New Jersey finally has a lieutenant governor. You talked about that in 1985. When we really didn't need it, but you were looking forward to the future. And then after we've had some of the changes that was mentioned, I think, by Tony here, where we had something like 6 governors in a short period of time, it became apparent that it was an idea whose time had come. One of the things that sticks out in my mind is people forget that when you got the nomination in '81, the first place you went to, when you talk about inclusion, was Camden, New Jersey. And you kicked off your campaign in Camden, New Jersey with a backdrop to say, why do we have to have our great cities looking like it is today? So again, when Nancy talked about the passage from your book, I read that passage last night, Nancy, and one of the things that I thought about was, again, it was mentioned here earlier, I think Steve had mentioned it, I think Bob had mentioned it, is that that's who the person that you were. I've come to realize, unfortunately, that Tom Kean is an anomaly in the Republican Party. I thought Tom Kean was setting the standard for the Republican Party to meet and catch up with. Unfortunately, what has turned out is that Tom Kean turned out to be, unfortunately, an anomaly. I wish that wasn't so, but as we look at the party today, it's almost incredible when we look back and see some of the things that you accomplished in including people and the African American vote that you were able to get, because your successors have really not blazed any trails. They benefited from what you did, even up until the 2001 campaign, but they really did not blaze any new trails. And lastly, I want to leave you with this. There were 2 things. One thing that you did that I didn't understand, and in hindsight today I do. In '89, when the campaign started, you made an announcement and you told any of the cabinet members if they were going to run for office, if they were going to endorse anyone for governor, they had to resign from the cabinet. And at that time, when I was a young person early in my career, I couldn't figure out why you made that demand or you said that of your cabinet member. But it's only now, as a cabinet member of county government, do I see the wisdom of that, because I've seen situations where people are running for office and still part of the government, and it's just not a good situation from an ethical standpoint, from a political standpoint. It ties the executive's hands and what he can do. And so I didn't understand that at the time, but today as a cabinet member in county government, I do. So I wanted to share that with you. And lastly, you don't remember this, I do, but in 1977, when I was getting ready to graduate from high school, you were campaigning for the nomination, and you were at the Ocean County Mall in Toms River, New Jersey. And you were by yourself with a couple other folks, and you were campaigning, introducing yourself, and I was coming through the mall, and I shook your hand and talked to you. I'd never heard of you before. I was just a high school senior, and I said, who is this guy? And I took your stuff, and believe it or not, for a long time, I put your post, you had a poster, folded out into a poster, and I put it up next to a picture of a Ferrari that I'd hoped to get one day. So for a long time, that picture hung up there, and it turned out to be a little historic piece, because I said, wow, look what wound up happening, but who would have thought that back in 1977? So I wanted to share that with you. I wanted to thank Lenny for all his friendship and everything that he's done, and also thank the both of you, because it was the both of you when the Republican National Committee was looking for somebody after the '88 campaign to work at the RNC. It was you who recommended, both of you, Len and you, who recommended me to go down there to the RNC, and that's how I got the experience in Washington. So
Thank you very much, and thank you, Governor, for being our host today. I started in the Kean administration 2 years out of college. Todd Caliguire and I were the young Turks. We thought we knew all the answers, had all the solutions, had a lot of energy, a lot of moxie, and took about 2 weeks for Gary Stein to explain to me that I didn't have all the answers. And I'm sure you did the same role with Todd Caliguire. But
at the Princetonian Diner.
Yes, at the Princetonian Diner. I was just talking about you, Todd, about how we started out as the young guys in the administration with all the answers and quickly found out we didn't know them. Well, but one thing that I learned quickly from Governor Kean and from Gary Stein is that he wanted to do things and to make things happen. And the legacy that the governor's left in urban areas is really quite startling. For one thing, he took a different approach. His approach to urban development wasn't just to send blank checks over and over and not see anything happen. It was to create partnerships with local developers, with local mayors, with mayors like Jerry McCann and John Lynch. It was to bring everyone to the room together to get things done. And I started as a young guy in the office and said, there's this waterfront development in Hudson County that's going to break, and it's going to be really big. And I wrote a memo to Gary Stein. He said, you know what, this makes a lot of sense. Why don't you go lead it? And that's what I did. And it was a sort of revolutionary idea. It was not to do it like the Meadowlands with a giant bureaucracy, not to do it with another layer of permits, but to bring everyone from Bob Huey at DEP and John Weingarten and the local officials like the mayors together, and to get a conversation going about how we can get these projects going. And now we have a tremendous waterfront in the Hudson County. We started the planning for the light rail system back in those years and moved tremendous progress on that light rail system. That's now a legacy towards that work. And we did crazy things like start up a waterfront marathon just to bring attention to the waterfront and to bring investors there and to showcase it. And it became the Olympic trials. So those are the type of things that we started early on. When I went to work for Len at Community Affairs, we started the Distressed Cities program. And this was a program that helped urban areas that were badly in need. And what we would do is there would be no politics about who got the money. It was based on need and urgency. And we went through all those applications very, very carefully. And the money came with strings. We had to send with the money some people who would work on the city's books to make sure that the money is going in the right places. In future years, the strings went away, the money kept going, and it was just politics that was deciding where the checks are going. But I'm proud to say that under Governor Kean and Len Coleman's direction, that the money was spent in the right way. And then you have where we are today, the New Jersey Pact, the Camden waterfront, the Hudson waterfront, urban enterprise zones. All these things began under Governor Kean. One of the things he also understood and made use of is private developers like Ron Berman, who's here today, and who did a lot to accomplish quite a bit in New Brunswick. Instead of just having the state build a building to put state employees in, we would use the lease as a base hold and say, okay, we'll be your anchor tenant in this building, but you need to build the rest of it and get private tenants to fill out the rest. You need to get stores to fill in the rest. And this was a leading strategy that did quite a bit to help New Brunswick with its revival and to help Trenton. Why not use a private developer who can build these buildings for less money than building it out of the government, where it costs more, takes longer, and fewer jobs are created? Revolutionary, makes a lot of sense, but at the time, a revolutionary idea. So these are some of the things that came to the table during the time that I was there, and I think they're lasting legacies as we see all these things have come to fruition over the years. And Ken, you were at policy and planning during that time. You want to expand on some of those things?
This morning we were talking about minority appointments, and one of the things that I wanted to mention was that in 1984, our public advocate resigned. He had been appointed to the federal bench. It was Joe Rodriguez. We were looking for a replacement for the public advocate, and Governor Kean insisted on naming a minority, someone who was well qualified for representing everything that the public advocate was supposed to offer at the time. And lo and behold, we found this fellow by the name of Al Slocum, who was a professor at Rutgers University Law School, who was clearly not of the same political spectrum as the governor. The governor took a lot of fire from his own party for that appointment. And remember, this is in 1984. The election was a couple years away. It was not yet assured that he was going to win or even be a favorite. The public advocate had a lot of power to sue the incumbent governor. Previous public advocates had done that. And so Tom was taking great chance in putting this person in charge of a department that could turn around and bite the administration. But he did, and Al Slocum did a great job at that office. Another issue before we get to urban enterprise zones, because of my involvement in it, I've always felt the greatest racial issue in New Jersey in the 1980s was auto insurance. In 1969, early 70s, the legislature passed a no-fault bill requiring that everybody carry auto insurance. The rates were high for everyone. The bill that was passed had a lot of problems, as did other auto insurance reform bills that were signed. But a bill that was put before the legislature, which we ultimately signed, provided for capping of rates in urban areas. When you cap rates in urban areas, that means they're going to go up in suburban and rural areas. Once again, this is 1983, February of 83, when the bill was signed. Still economic problems. Governor Kean's popularity was fairly low at that point. He was a new governor. The economy was still bad. We hadn't hit the wave that we were going to ride for the next few years. But Governor Kean thought it was the right thing to do. If we were going to mandate that people had to buy auto insurance, it had to be affordable. And that's something which the residents of all of the urban areas in New Jersey really did benefit from. And then lastly, urban enterprise zones. One of the 3 or 4 priorities that we had when the governor was elected was getting urban enterprise zones through the legislature. Jack Kemp had come into the state and campaigned for the governor. It was something that he cared very much about. We needed to provide some economic stimulus, and we thought it was a great idea. There was only one problem. Again, it was 1982-83. Both houses of the legislature were controlled by the opposite party, and there was not a lot of receptiveness to any idea coming out of the administration, whether it was on public policy grounds or political grounds. Nothing was getting through. It was my privilege to talk to a number of the leaders in the Assembly and the Senate. Senator Lynch was clearly a very important part of that discussion. But the legislature did approve a bill, and what I remember most about the discussions with the legislative leaders was how nonpartisan and non-political the actual discussions were. What stimulus package, what tax abatements, what changes or modifications to current laws could be made in order to improve the economic climate in the cities. And again, in my discussions and meetings with Senator Lynch and others, we found common ground, and that bill was, I think, one of the first successes, bipartisan successes, that the administration had.
Mayor Lynch and Chris Palladino from New Brunswick, if maybe you could talk a little bit about how the administration put together sort of the packages that led to much of the development in New Brunswick. Mayor, you want to start?
I think the governor, what he has said before, that these urban development programs have to be a partnership. He not only appreciated what he was saying, but he lived it, participated in it, because if you have a competent plan in an urban environment, whether it's in Jersey City or New Brunswick, usually there's pieces missing. You may be getting an urban development action grant in those days, or you may have resources coming from here or there or wherever, but there's pieces missing. It's either a gap funding source, as would be provided by the EDA or from the community development bond issue or things like that, or in many cases a human resource, or in many other cases infrastructure. What the governor understood, if you went and talked to him and plans were laid out, he understood instinctively what could work and what couldn't work, what was worthwhile investing in, what wasn't worthwhile investing in, what would make sense for the urban environment and what wouldn't. And beyond that, we all know some of the success stories in some of the cities and so forth. People forget about some of the other side of where this governor came from in terms of urban development, the arts. The arts are critical to the urban environment. Look where we're at. What's probably the most significant thing that happened here in Newark in the last 25 years in terms of bringing people in, creating jobs, changing the environment, doing such. And while we in New Brunswick railed about the ultimate selection of Newark as the state center, and I forget the gentleman's name who you commissioned to do the statewide study, but that sort of became the name of the report. And it said all kinds of nice things about Morristown and New Brunswick, and then ultimately it was Newark. In the big picture, it was the right decision. There's no question about that. In New Brunswick, thanks to you and the bond issue that we were able to create when we married up the historic preservation, arts, and Green Acres as the flagship to ensure that it would pass, was the first, with your assistance and stimulus, was the first time the arts groups in the state ever really coalesced and supported one another, and were looking at common ground and common good. And heretofore they were fighting over crumbs and share base and so forth and so on. And it was a new day, a new era. And if you look at what's happened as a result of the arts infrastructure, it changed the dynamic in many of the urban centers, whether it was New Brunswick or Red Bank or Newark or Morristown, et cetera. And people missed that was so critical. And the same thing too in many of our cases, higher education, big urban economic development tool. Not only is it social empowerment, but it was also it was economic development and opportunities for education. The relationships, the partnerships you formed with Rutgers Ed Blaustein was unique to the state, and with other university and college presidents around the state. It was an exciting time for higher education. You had a mission that spilled into the urbans in many, many ways and was critical to our evolution in cities like New Brunswick. So, we like to point to how we got the Hyatt Hotel done and how we got the Golden Triangle done and all these other things. And they were really a partnership that the state would fill gaps with. But some of the more non-recognized issues like the arts, like higher ed, that were absolutely pivotal to the long-term future of the city of New Brunswick, and more importantly, its residents. And while it's never an easy process, and will always have its bad days, you wind up having more good days than bad. And I don't think that anyone has grasped the need in the urban environment like you did, because it's a mosaic, and there's all these pieces that need to fit over the long haul, and you grasped it and you understood the partnership concept as nobody has in modern times. So, I can't say enough about that tenure. A lot of people said about me over the years who follow you in one way or another that during the 80s I was a policy person, and after that I became a partisan. And I think, when in reflecting on it, that's true, but I credit that fact to you and the fact that you were so easy to work with on competent public policy. And of course, it's before the day of the symbols of the left and the symbols of the right that make things so difficult today. So again, you were a breath of fresh air for us in the urbans, and you understood the big picture.
I couldn't agree with Senator Lynch more. Actually, I was wondering why I was invited today. When you were elected governor, I was 20. But actually, the election of Republican governors in New Jersey have just profoundly affected my life, because I figure being a very enthusiastic Jim Florio campus activist in 1981, if you had not won that election, I would probably be a mid-level bureaucrat in motor vehicle today. Had not gone on to law school, not met my wife, and then certainly not be doing what I'm doing today. Actually, the election of Christy Whitman forced me into another career change, where I got to come back to New Brunswick, which was probably the best thing that ever happened to me after meeting my wife. But Senator Lynch, in our regular meetings, would probably play you the greatest compliment, because when I'd bring him a problem with respect to a project we were working on, almost all the time it started at, well, if Tom Kean was governor, this is what we would do. Just focusing on the arts, the governor truly understands the nexus between, I think, the emotional part of the arts and the economic part of the arts. He certainly understands how the arts can move us, more importantly, bring communities together that would not necessarily be in one place together. But also, the arts in the United States employs 6 million people. It's a good investment. I think last year the federal government, state government, local governments spent $4 billion on the arts, but it returned $30 billion in tax revenue. It's a pretty good investment. I'd probably do that any day. But in New Brunswick, it really has been truly meaningful. Yes, we have restaurants. Yes, we've got restaurants in large part because of the arts community. But when we were trying to finance the Heldridge Hotel and Conference Center, we had this concept that we were going to build a conference center. I didn't take, people said, why would people come to New Brunswick? Why would they spend 2.5 days? Why would they pay you $300 a night? And when we brought investors for an investor tour, after taking them to stage left, that wouldn't be there but for the arts, we didn't take them to see our ski slope or our beach or our golf course, which everybody else does when you're trying to finance a hotel and conference center. I took them in the back door of the State Theater, and the lights were off. And we turned on the lights and said, this is why people come to New Brunswick. This is why they come back. And those people loaned us a lot of money. That was a very, very tangible thing, that the investment in the arts, it doesn't happen overnight. I know Larry Goldman's still fighting the good fight here, and soon across the street, buildings will get built. But it's a long-term investment that brings people back to cities. Those of us in New Jersey who are all used to living in the suburbs, want to find a sense of place and want to come back to cities. And they're now starting to live in cities again. And it's the arts that attracts people back to our cities. Often these type of events take on a tone of awake, because we seem to be talking about people in the past sense. One of the good things for us in the New Brunswick anyway is that the Kean years aren't over. Governor Kean obviously serves as the chairman of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which is very important to us. And we continue to have that discussion, even though, much like the J&J Corporation that knows far more about Tiananmen Square than the corner of George and Albany today, and the foundation has a national, worldwide interest in healthcare. Governor Kean understands that the arts, providing grocery stores, providing wellness and fitness centers, those types of things are an important part of not only urban life, but on trying to create great places for all types of people. So, Governor, thank you.
Part of a successful urban development strategy is having good developers who know what they're doing and who are willing to take risks. And back in that day, in the 80s, it was perceived to be much more risky to invest in urban areas. And one of the guys who was on the forefront of developing in New Brunswick and Trenton is Ron Berman. And Ron, maybe if you could say a few words about the administration's policy.
Clearly in New Brunswick, and I got involved kind of early on in the early 80s. The arts were then contained in a supermarket, an ex-supermarket on George Street, and it was a totally different city. John Lynch had just, I think, become the mayor, and we were in a recession that almost parallels these current days. Economic activity had simply stopped, and it was very hard to figure out how any economic development was going to get done, let alone economic development in the urban areas that nobody at that time wanted to touch. You could go into the development communities. I remember we developed in suburban areas as well, but I could not convince the NAIOP or the planning agencies or anybody else that you needed effective policies to get the urban areas going. The arts in New Brunswick, as everybody has said, was clearly critical. Without the arts, the restaurants would not have come and would not have survived. Without the restaurants, whatever commercial activity came about at that time would not have occurred. And without all those things happening, the ability to do housing in a downtown urban area would not have occurred. So if you look back on the history of what happened in New Brunswick, there's no question that the arts were critical. And in Trenton, there too, no building had been built for 40 years in the downtown, and the combination of policies to jumpstart economic development by using the state offices as 50% of the building and then inducing developers to come in and take a chance that they could use the private sector for the other, that was critical in all of the development that occurred in Trenton. So having said that, in New Brunswick, clearly, with John Lynch and the governor at that time, I'm sure the plans were being made, although they came about later. The ability to get Rutgers University to move across Albany Street was critical in all the things that happened there. So, and just one more point that I think, since this group is together, the notion of partnership that John Lynch talked about was critical because New Brunswick was prepared to do its part like no other city. It had institutions in place that were able to take advantage of both the state and the federal programs and try to coordinate it. And that's still critical. The success or failure depends not only on the state and state policies. You can have all the state policies that you want. That's only one piece of it. If you don't have the local infrastructure and political abilities, not much happens. So I guess that's my take.
Len, I know you want to add something.
Yeah, just to add to that, since we're on the arts, and I think if you look at it, once again, let's look, Republican governor, basically, in this state generally would want to appeal to the suburban areas, more of the rural areas. But as you mentioned in your opening remarks, Larry, in Hudson County, you got this whole Hudson County waterfront development going on, pretty much across Democratic townships. We all know that there would not be a PAC center if it wasn't, in a sense, Tom's personal project. But let's not forget also, he moved south with the Camden Aquarium, which really didn't have support except for the support that he created. So he put that, put that into once again Camden and everything. Certainly not a strong bit of republicanism. But I would also say that one of the governor's great strengths was that he put people in place in a sense that could sort of champion or build a consensus behind something. When we talk about the arts, let's not forget that he put Celeste Holm in as an Academy Award-winning actress, and she gave it glamour and went around, and Celeste showed up at things and basically built support for it. And then he also took the Secretary of State's role with our colleague Jane Bergio, and Jane became known as Miss Arts in the state of New Jersey. I mean, it wasn't you couldn't open a kids play without Jane being there, and so she represented and once again built things up. And he had this knack of giving people things that they could thrive with. He gave Jane the arts. I was very happy because he took physical fitness and took it out of health and gave it to me at Community Affairs, and we put on the marathon and all these other sports things I was happy with. So he put us in positions where we could take things that we liked and really run with it. And I think he was very accomplished in terms of his economic development with the arts by putting people in and starting projects that people could see through for him.
We'd be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that, John, you agree that Crossroads came into being during that time. Crossroads Theater. That's right. And then they expanded and became a Tony Award winning theater. And that was from the minority community. And then the restaurants that catered to those visitors there, although, like myself, we go into every restaurant until the food tastes bad. But those, again, like you said, Lynn, he put people in a position. I'd rather think, though, he created the kind of climate that you could plant anything that you would nurture and grow. That's what he was known for.
Speaking of planting things, part of the mosaic of urban life is the environment, and two people who were very involved in doing that is John Weingart and Commissioner Huey. During the time I was at the waterfront office, preservation and promotion of Liberty State Park was a very high priority. And leaps and bounds were made in terms of the quality and improvement to that park, which is essential to urban living. And the other part was the waterfront walkway, which we required every developer to build in front of their property on thin legal grounds, but they all did it, and we're all very happy that they did do it. They protested it, and they thought about suing, but they understood that the level of cooperation that they were getting was worth not getting into a battle over. And I'm wondering if Commissioner, if you and John would like to talk about the environment.
Well, I think, when you have a session like today, rather than you just get bogged down in the past, you have to think about how history repeats itself. And Tom ran an administration based on the 3 E's: education, the environment, and employment. Now, nationally, I'm working on a national program on transit-related development. And it's funny, all the conversations that I have today are exact repeats of the conversations that we had 30 years ago. Because, the terms have changed. We've gone through, protect the environment, to smart growth, to we're going to green everything, and now we're talking about sustainability. That's the big deal. Well, sustainability is the balance between growth and the environment. And Tom recognized that. And I think one of the things we did is we never had to put a special committee or group together to have a combined position as an administration. we actually walked into the same room, had a meeting, came to a conclusion, and whether it was doing things like in Jersey City where, for sewer construction in those days, everybody built their own. And the environmental community wasn't quite sure that it was a good idea to connect a Jersey City to a Passaic. And we sat in a room and said, well, Jesus, seems like it makes a lot of sense. They have capacity, and they've got very high rates, and you have no capacity, and you're under a ban that you can't grow. So within, probably 90 days, we decided that maybe that was not a good idea, that maybe we should merge those two. And the other observation I would make is that just like today, when Tom started out, we didn't have the money to do a lot of things. And we had the opportunity to work together, but we had 2 years to plan things. And I think if you wanted to talk about the missing ingredient in government today, it's that we don't take advantage of times like these to plan what we're going to do when we come out the other side. 2 years from now, we're going to come out the other side. The question is, do we have a plan? And do we know what we're going to fund? Are we going to put all those pieces in place? And we're going to have our master plans ready for transit-oriented development? And are we going to have light rail projects planned for the future? The answer to that, from my experience in government right now, is no. We're not going to have that done at a national level. We're not going to have that done at a state level. And the reason is that everybody works in their own area today. We work on economic development, we work on education, we work on planning, we work on the environment. And the fact of the matter is, to make those things work, you got to put them all together. And I think that's what we did. And we took, and I'll let John talk about this, because with every carrot that we gave, and we gave a lot at DEP in those days, we made a lot of exceptions for a lot of good projects. But with every carrot, we had a stick. And the waterfront development program was a part of that stick. And I'll turn it over to John.
The Department of Environmental Protection's been characterized and criticized over the years as being an upside-down organization where policy is set at the bottom by the career civil servants who've been there a long time and can write 400 pages of regulations and sort of get them through. And individual project review happens at the top, where developers with access meet with the commissioner or whoever and negotiate what needs to be negotiated because of these crazy rules that got adopted earlier. And that was pretty much not true in the Kean administration. I was in DEP for 4 governors and 12 commissioners. And for the Hudson waterfront, there was a clear policy that was, we were going to try to help guide, we were going to try to help the waterfront get redeveloped and help guide how that happens. And there were essentially 2 sub-policies of that. One was to build, it was like a front yard and backyard. One was to, the developers who were going to build there should build a walkway along the waterfront, Bob referred to. That was sort of modeled on what had happened in New York City, or was happening in New York City at that time, except that New York City and New York State were putting tons of money into it, and New Jersey was going to put none, but have, or very little, and have developers do that. And the backyard being New Jersey Transit developing a light rail line. And the idea was that each developer would set aside enough land to make that happen, both the walkway and New Jersey Transit line. And at the beginning, it took a lot of credibility. I mean, it was a question that developers would ask because they'd be building between 2 abandoned warehouses and piers and rotting piers, and to envision a line running in either in front or in back was very difficult for them. Many developers who come into DEP or their agents or consultants or lawyers will say, I just had dinner with the governor last night, I just went to the opera, and we at my level, we never heard about that again. I mean, I assume they did see you, but whatever they said, it was, so there was an atmosphere that we could, that the protecting the environment or creating a good environment and stimulating the economy really could go hand in hand in those years in a way that's very difficult, even though everyone pays lip service to it in general terms. The other thing that I just want to put on the table in terms of urban redevelopment that happened during the Kean administration was the Freshwater Wetlands Act, which was championed for most of its career through the legislature by environmental activists, and its leading champion in the legislature was Maureen Ogden, a Republican from Morris County who was known primarily for her advocacy of protecting the environment. When it finally got negotiated and got through the legislature, it was because John Lynch joined in that effort, and the two of them became lead partners on it. And the idea was that not only were you going to protect sensitive resources in rural areas, but part of that was it was going to push developers to go into urban areas because those areas were going to become, by comparison, easier to build. I'm not sure whether that actually happened, but that was the part of the policy that was driving behind that and what happened in the Kean.
We were able to work with mayors who were of the opposite party. And in the case of Mayor McCann, we didn't need bulldozers in Jersey City because we had Mayor McCann, a one-man bulldozer. And his ambition for the waterfront and for Hudson County and for his city probably cost him his re-election. But he was committed to doing things the right way, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
First of all, to put it all into perspective, Governor Kean served in 2 recessions. He took office in 1981. We were in a recession. And we later went into another recession in 1987, 88, 89. So he wasn't in the best of times. But the activity and the growth that occurred in Jersey City in particular was overwhelming in spite of a bad economy. You know, Bob mentioned something before, and I wanted to repeat it, is that we had a building ban in Jersey City. We couldn't build anything on the waterfront. So when people said, oh, it was easy to do, well, that wasn't true. We couldn't build anything in Jersey City because we didn't have the capacity in our sewage system. So before we could do anything, we had to work with DEP to resolve the problem of the sewage capacity. And working with Bob and the governor's administration, we were able to build a pipeline under the Newark Bay. We first came up with all these ideas of how we were going to get to Passaic Valley, but then the most direct way was build it under the bay and a direct connection. We did that. There was a number of other problems at the Newport development, which Tony was well aware of, because we were building on railroad yards. We had a considerable amount of ash that was used as fill in those railroad yards over the years that had to be removed and addressed. During the growth of our city, we ended up finding chromium deposits all over the city that we had to eventually address. So we went, in the case of the chromium, we had to go all the way to the Supreme Court in order to win a case that eventually set the standard for environmental cleanups all over the country. It cost us $1.9 million to build one two-family home in legal fees to win a lawsuit, which eventually allowed the cleanup of all that. So the city's had environmental problems, and in Jersey City in particular, we had considerable environmental problems. So it was very, very important that we work with the governor's administration to deal with the environment before we could start anything. It was as was mentioned before about the light rail. One of the other things that we had was starting to develop a waterfront, and we had a path station at Pavonia, which is now in the heart of the Newport development. That wasn't, I would say, if you put these two tables together, that was the entire size of the path station. It was a corrugated metal building that was no more than just 2 people could go into, and then there was a walk, steps that you had to go down and down and down and down and down until you got to the path station. We had an exchange place path station that had a similar type of problem. So those things also needed to be addressed. I jokingly told the governor before that for years the mayor of Jersey City always opposed increasing the path fare. And what happened as a result of not increasing the path fare? The path never invested anything into Jersey City. So at some point we had to decide, look, 35 cents is a good deal, and I think we can probably increase it to $1 and not break anybody's back. And from that, the governor got us a new path station at Exchange Place, a new path station at Pavonia, the planning of the light rail, which ran the whole length of the waterfront from Bayonne on, was very important to that development. But there was another and crucial part that people haven't, I think to a certain degree people forget. But Tom Kean introduced the Transportation Trust Fund in the state of New Jersey that funded all road improvements and all highway improvements to the state of New Jersey. And even that was a partisan bill. I know John Lynch helped us with that. But in the beginning, the Democrats had taken the opposite position. They said, now that's a Republican bill, we're not passing it. And I remember coming down to Trenton to meet with the governor, with Mayor Collins of Bayonne, and we assured him that those 6 assemblymen from Hudson County and those 3 senators from Hudson County will be voting for the Transportation Trust Fund, and that created the collapse of the opposition, and the Transportation Trust Fund was put into place, which funds now all development in the city. And I remember the governor coming to us because we had a highway called Route 169. The problem with Route 69 is it didn't connect. So it ended at some point. There was a bridge in the middle, but there was no connection to the bridge in the middle. At some point, the governor and Dennis Collins and I stood on that broken up highway and said, we need to connect these 2 bridges in order to complete the waterfront highway. And the Transportation Trust Fund was one of the first projects that we were one of the first to get it. Now, it also kind of helped for us that I'm not sure how I actually did this, but I got talked into this by Ray Donovan to support Ronald Reagan for president in 1980, and that surely didn't hurt me. Ronald Reagan, almost any piece of paper I sent to Washington came back with money. I got all the urban enterprise money. In fact, I used to go to Mayor's Enterprise, and no one even wanted to talk to me because I would get all the money from our waterfront. But the start of the Newport development and the start of the Exchange Place development and the Harborside development, and one other thing, Governor, although it's not necessarily the arts, but it was similar, that the start of the looking for the site of the Liberty Science Center started in your administration, and we put on a big push for it, and plus we donated 20 acres of land right on the river to build the Liberty Science Center, so that was also a testament to your tenure in office. And another thing which you did, which a lot of people might not necessarily understand the connection to it, but you had a great relationship with public service. And it was so crucial for us that public service and the expansion of the electric power into our waterfront. The main industry that we were attracting to Jersey City was the data centers. But we didn't have the capacity of power in the waterfront. So it was so important that it was coordinated with the development that the electrical power into Jersey City, which was really one of the main engines that brought about a lot of the growth of our waterfront. And that was also in coordination with Larry and all the other people of your administration. And I can honestly say that I can't say I got 100% from you, Governor. I'd say it was probably closer to 97, 98. But I would gladly take the 97 and 98 any day. But we had a great working relationship. The people in your administration worked very closely. Len mentioned about the waterfront marathon. The person who also came to me was a great marathon runner, Sal Vega, who's now the mayor of West New York. He was an all-American runner at the University of Tennessee at that time. Governor, I somewhat have gone back to my roots because I am now a high school track coach at St. Peter's Prep for the past 3 years. So I decided it was the one thing I liked doing. So I figured I'm not going to do all the other things. I'm going to go back to what I like doing. So I'm a high school track coach now. But whether it been Newport, whether it been Exchange Place, the towers that are now built in Jersey City, all of it occurred during your administration. And anything that's happened since then has just been something that's been added to a plan that was already in place. So I appreciate the support that we've had with your administration. And I'm going to tell you the one thing that you didn't cooperate on, and I'm going to tell you because another governor after you got the credit for it. But in 1984, I sued the city of New York over the ownership of the Statue of Liberty. And in 1990, I sued the city of New York again over the Statue of Liberty. But your preceding governor, Governor Whitman, followed my lawsuit and won that. You could have got all the credit for that then, Governor. But we appreciate everything that you've done for us.
I just want to say that part of making all these things happen would be negotiating deals with the Port Authority, with developers, with all these different agencies. And no one did that better than Carrie Edwards and his partner, Todd Caliguire, his deputy. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Jerry, the failure of the governor to support the Statue of Liberty case, I think you'll hear in just a minute, had a bit of practical politics involved in it. When the administration first came together, Hugh Carey was governor of New York, and Hugh Carey had vetoed the minutes of the Port Authority. And Mario Cuomo came in as governor following that. Mike Del Giudice and I, at the governor's request, and Mike Del Giudice was secretary to Governor Cuomo, began extensive, and Todd was the main staff person on that, which is how he got involved with Mr. Dunn and a bunch of other people. Developed a program to monetize let me change the politics of that. The politics of the Port Authority at the time was they were dominated by the city of New York. That's right. Not by the two governors of the two states. And our goal, and it turned out to be Governor Cuomo's goal also, was to change that dynamic. That the Port Authority was a dynamic economic engine for the region, not for the city of New York, and a lot of other people. So with the governor's support and ultimately Mario Cuomo's support, we developed a partnership with the Cuomo administration. Tom did on a very, very personal basis with Mario Cuomo, and our staffs did all the way down the line. And we took, as an example, the value of the World Trade Center and New York State's 50 floors on the World Trade Center and monetized those, moved them out of the Trade Center. Instead of them paying $8 a foot, Todd, I think we wound up getting $45 a square foot for those dollars. And if you remember back then, all of a sudden a whole lot of NJ Transit buses started popping up from somewhere. And on this little sign on the side of paid for by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. By monetizing the value of the assets of the Port Authority, we were able to garner, in a time when we didn't have resources, to put into the transportation development of the waterfront, the transportation piece of that network. The Wastewater Treatment Trust, the Environmental Trust, which also does water and sewer, was created at the same time the Transportation Trust was. But the important part of all that was not just it wasn't the dollars, although they were vitally important. And the transportation network that was created as a result of that, now the light rail line and everything you see in Jersey City. But Mayor, everything that you got and the cooperation from the Port Authority that happened was not as a direct result of us vetoing minutes or us putting a heavy hand on the Port Authority. It was a partnership between two governors who recognized that the economic growth of the region was more important than a fight between who got what dollars and how it was divided. And so that there were 100 issues that developed during the state of New York, between the state of New York and the state of New Jersey, that never hit the newspapers and that resolved for the benefit of both states, finding real solutions, of which the Port Authority was only a part of it. The end result was a whole lot of issues, including, I think, a great deal of development along the Hudson waterfront, along with the partnership that was created by you, Mayor, and the people of Jersey City and the other mayors along that particular world. It was the relationship and the political and personal relationship between Tom Kean and Mario Cuomo, I think, that permitted so many of those things to happen. Again, the inclusion, the sense of fairness that Tom Kean had, and I think that Mario Cuomo had, and has always been noted for, was something they had in common. And it was a politics of inclusion that continued in hundreds of different ways, of which the development of the Hudson waterfront today is only a part of it. And the two governors did succeed in taking control, or not succeed completely, but 90% control of the Port Authority between the states of New York and the state of New Jersey for the benefit of the region. And that was done because of the political and personal skills of the governor at that time. And we see the benefits of that in all of these particular programs. But I don't know of any one set of moves that was more significant with reference to the bi-state issues that benefited New Jersey and New York, notwithstanding the popular opinion that New York got everything and New Jersey didn't get everything. Trust me, we got our half from that point forward, and we got it square and in spades.
Fill in a little bit on that, because one of the pleasures, honestly, of being governor was my friendship with Mario Cuomo. He and I got along extraordinarily well, probably better than any two governors in New York and New Jersey ever gotten along. We still get along very well. I'm having lunch with him in a couple of weeks. And by the way, I get along, I'm told I'm the only governor in history who's gotten along with both the governor of New York and the mayor of New York. But that was we had lunch, Kerry, every couple of months? Anyway.
Every 6 weeks.
Every 6 weeks, Mary
and any time we needed to, we would talk.
Yeah, we'd never have never any publicity. We'd never tell the press about it. We'd meet somewhere or another in New York or New Jersey and have lunch or have breakfast or have whatever. And we'd look at any issue, often issues that have been brought up by Todd or by Kerry or by Governor Cuomo's people. And we'd talk, what are these issues and what do we want? And then we'd look at the evenness of stuff, and occasionally, New Yorkers have to throw things in. I mean, we got an office building in Newark at one point because we had a little bit of money left over, and Cuomo said, "We've got what do you want?"
Office, the legal center in Newark was the final dollars necessary to balance, so we were guaranteed we both got 50%.
Yeah. But that was a pleasure and that kind of relationship, and the Statue of Liberty story is interesting because Cuomo and I worked that out over a breakfast. And what we decided was that the Statue of Liberty really didn't belong to New Jersey or New York. It was really a national treasure and ought to belong to the country as a whole. And a lot of the issue was between who's got the sales tax revenue from the sales and tourists and everything. So, all right, let's split the revenue and legislate that both states have got to give that revenue to programs for the homeless. And we thought that was a pretty good deal. And we got it through, I think, New Jersey. We got it through the New Jersey legislature. Cuomo got it through one house, and New York Senate blocked it. So that was our solution to that one. And let me say one final thing, as long as I've got the microphone.
And that was the city problem.
That was the city.
That was the city of New York who was blocking that because they got the sales tax.
No, in fact, that's what I was going to say, but go ahead. I'm sorry, Governor. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, they said one thing as long as I got here, because I got failures for a minute. These were successes because, frankly, there were very good people in these cities working on these things. Jerry, and there wouldn't have been a mayor than John Lynch. And we had programs for each city and little benefits for each city. I mean, we wanted to establish Liberty Science Center in Jersey City. We wanted to do the PAC in Newark. We had programs for New Brunswick involving the arts and the hotels, businesses in that center. Patterson was supposed to be around the Great Falls. Trenton was supposed to be bringing the state back into the city because a lot of the state building we tried to rebuild in the city. Camden was not a success. We worked with Randy Primus, who was a good guy. But the kind of things we were trying to do for Camden sort of fell apart in the end. They wanted the aquarium, and there wasn't any aquarium in the area. Thought that would be a success. But we know that you couldn't have just one thing like that and have a success. You need other things. So we had a general plan for Camden. We were going to bring in addition to that, RCA, who was then located around Camden, had promised to build a space museum based on their accomplishments. Campbell Soup was going to do a program involving historic terrains and a bunch of other stuff, and they were going to do something involving Walt Whitman's home, and there was a whole bunch of things in and around that area. And then we started working on bringing the 76ers and the Flyers to Camden, which actually, the location we had was closer to downtown Philadelphia than where they were at that point. And it sort of fell apart. The guy who ran Campbell Soup died, Mr. Dorrance. Successor came in and said, I don't think we want to make that kind of commitment to Camden. RCA got sold to GE. So the idea of the Space Museum went out. We were working on those two teams, and I think we had a pretty good agreement worked out. But it was too late in the administration, really, and we had Bob Mulcahy negotiating it for us, who was good. From the Sports Authority, and what happened, I think, we went out of office. And any governor wants new things and new people. So when Jim Florio came in, he got rid of Bob Mulcahy and our people. Took a while appointing his own people to do the negotiations. Took 5 or 6 months to get his team going. By the time his team got going, Philadelphia, unfortunately, city and state got its act together. And they ended up staying there. So Camden sort of fell apart in that way. Plus which the aquarium, the wonderful idea we had from the Philadelphia Zoo was that kids would really want to come and see all the wonderful fish that were in the water off the Atlantic where they swam and went to the Jersey Shore. And they didn't know all everything. So we have all these fish that were going to be gathered in the aquarium that were really out there and people didn't know it. So that was the idea of the museum. We had them running the aquarium.
Tom, let me.
What we didn't What we didn't recognize was all those fish were brown, and people got tired of seeing them. But anyway, Camden was an area. It was sad because it was the worst case in the state. Camden, the poverty and the problems, and it was it was a failure. I mean, we just weren't ever able to put the stuff together to really make Camden be the city it still should be.
The key to the success of many of the programs, as I lived them or remembered them or watched them, were partnerships that Tom put together. Partnerships with John Lynch in New Brunswick or partnerships in Newark, and they always had a private industry component to them, J&J and other private supporters, DKM and other builders. So the partnership was real. We had worked out a partnership, the same program. Tom had done the same sales pitch, RCA, Campbell, big supporters, and the reason it didn't work is one part of the partnership couldn't produce, and it was RCA and Campbell Soup. Campbell Soup was supposed to pay, with a foundation, all of the operating expenses for, just as one piece of this, all the operating expenses for the aquarium. And they bailed out on that commitment and the other commitments to build the other pieces that would have built that entire waterfront into a major economic and industrial powerhouse for southern New Jersey and Pennsylvania and that region of the country, which was entirely different. We were looking to create the same partnerships in Camden using the DRPA and various others and private sectors to do in Camden what we were able to do in various North Jersey pieces. And the private sector is the one that literally fell apart on us. Notwithstanding the fact that all the pieces had been negotiated and were in place, and we just couldn't hold them accountable to it. And had that not happened, Tom, I think beyond any shadow of a doubt, you'd be looking at an entirely different Camden than you've looked at for the last 25 years.
Carrie, just one quick comment, because it actually is going to relate to you, Mr. Dunn. This is about Tom Kean keeping his word. In 1984-85, we, in effect, were the next town up for the urban enterprise zone, of the political arrangement of that. And the governor's office called me and said, is there any way that you could step aside and allow Plainfield to be picked? And I said, well, Governor, this is, this is an important part. And I had been picked by Ronald Reagan to be at the White House when they announced the National Enterprise Zone. So I just come out of the White House, and now I'm the next one up, and now they're asking me to step aside for Plainfield. So I wasn't sure that I was going to do it or not, but I said, well, let me go to the hearing. After hearing Plainfield's argument, I withdrew my application, but he promised me that I would be the next one up. Now, I lost the election a couple of months later, and now I'm out of office, and I don't have the enterprise zone. The new mayor didn't want the enterprise zone for whatever the reason. I think John Lynch kind of attested to that mayor's comments before. But as soon as I came back to office in July of 1989, my application was right up front, and we got the urban enterprise zone. So that's about also keeping his word. It might have been 4 years later, but he kept his word. I would be the next one, and I was. So it kind of had tied into your statement before about Plainfield. And the last thing, Carrie, I just wanted you to know, when Governor Cuomo came to Hoboken, when they announced the project, I brought Governor Cuomo a picture of his father renovating Holy Rosary Church in Jersey City to remind him that the Cuomos came from Italy to Jersey City, not to New York. They didn't live in New York. They lived in New Jersey. And we also reminded Koch, who was the antagonist of the battles between the states, that he also came from Newark. So yes, I agree with you. It wasn't the state who gave us the problem. It was primarily Mayor Koch, who was a good friend, but he was more of the
New York.
Yeah, he was more of the back. I told everybody he was always part of the entertainment of New York, Ed Koch. So.
He was the reverse. He was a New Jerseyite that went to New York and forgot where he came from. Governor Kean did something else we all seem to forget. Notwithstanding your development of waterfront and you're trying to do something in Camden, he straightened out the beaches of New Jersey, if you remember. The medical waste and all that. Right. And he gave us back our beaches. That's what God gave us, not a developer. The second thing you remember was the relationship, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out something you might have forgotten by now. If you remember, after you did that mighty thing for us, I think my brother got to know you pretty good. And he had been, as a child, he and I and my brother, my mom was committed to a mental institution when we were young. And down the street there was a factory called Ideal Store Fixtures. And my brother and I got in some trouble one day, not Danny, another brother. And we were discovered as juveniles, and what we did was just destroy the skylight. And the bricks went down in the skylight. I got to tell you this entrepreneurial story just for a minute. We were throwing bricks down in the skylight, and we ran out of bricks. But you remember in the old days, on the roof, there were clotheslines. So Genius Me took the clothesline and tied it to a brick, and we were there all day. Well, we got to, yes, on the same brick. We were arrested and taken to court. And a judge was going to put, and did put, 2 other fellas. This is the second chance we're talking about. 2 other fellas went to jail. And it's reform school. We were 13 and 14. And when they got out, they stayed on a course that caused both of them to die before they were 35 years old. But that judge heard my dad say that he was going to keep our family together until our mother came home. And he did. One day after we got the contract, Danny went home to Brooklyn and saw a white man, that was beaten and laying on the street. And Danny recognized the man. His name was Charlie Raffer. Danny can finish the story. But Charlie Raffer is the father of Matilda Cuomo, who was a girl. Her father was the controller of the factory. And when Danny saw them, he said, that's Mr. Cuomo. And he went to the hospital, and the state troopers were boom, boom, And he said, I know him. And Matilda said, Danny Dunn, that kid used to come to the factory, give him the soda bottles to go to save, the cash in. And I think, I'm not mistaken, he brought you and Miss Cuomo together to deal with the Children's Village edifice up in upstate New York, where he was a student. I'll use that word loosely, okay? And I think you and Miss Cuomo had a common interest in the plight of young juveniles. Okay? But I'm saying this because that's how we Duns give back. You do for us, we'll do for you.
I have one little story. I tell this many, many times when when I've been around the governor or in other places. And John, you said the governor would bump into people at operas and they'd come back to you with the story about how he approved all these things. My job as council of governor was very simple in reality. If you've noticed, Tom, sitting here during this entire, everybody's saying things and his head's going up and down like this. His head's going up and down like this. People would come in and meet with the governor, legislators, important people, all kinds of issues, and Tom would sit in the office and his head would go up and down like this. They would walk out. It was my job to tell them the minute they got outside the door, this does not mean yes. This does not mean yes. So, Mayor, you've got to get a bigger commitment than this. You've got to get the yes from here, in reality. Another part of the Kean charm, everybody thought as he's going like this, and they're all, oh, yes, and he really was it was response. I understand, I'm sympathetic, but it wasn't a decision. And they were taking it to the decision level. So I had the dubious distinction of telling everybody, this does not mean yes, which I did for 4 years. I'm assuming Michael had to do exactly the same thing. And I know Michael and I have talked about it in many, many different occasions, that was the primary job of the chief counsel, the governor, was to be sure that everyone who left the office didn't think this was yes.
If I can add to that, I agree with Kerry with that, in the sense that people would tell me they had a meeting with the governor, and they did the same thing to get the yes. And I said, well, did he lean forward in the chair? And if they told me, I said, look, if he leaned forward in the chair, the answer is yes. If he didn't lean forward in the chair, I'm going to tell you right now, you're getting a call from either Kerry or Greg Stevens is a no.
Lenny, if I might, Governor, as I said, I had the privilege of watching all these other guys sweat while you were governor. And Jerry, if we're talking about New Jersey politics and governing, right? And Jerry used to go and cut all these deals and get everything, and all the other mayors are saying, Jerry's selling out. And so, well, Jerry's in Trenton again, and, oh, well, no, Jerry's in the governor's Newark office, and Jerry was everywhere, right? And I was a staffer, so I would watch these guys. John, you know how the staffers, much like Kerry, we had to always give the bad news, right? So finally, we sit in this meeting, and to hold everybody harmless, we won't mention the particular mayors, but they said, well, damn, we're really tired. Jerry gets everything, and Jerry is supposed to be a Democrat. I said, I think Jerry's a businessman. And I said that in the meeting, and people looked at me and says, you're turning too. And I said, no, what the reality was that it was not so much that people were selling out. I told them that Tom Kean separate the DNR factor. It wasn't that people were selling out. It was that Tom Kean had something to sell. And it was about fixing cities and places in the state that he's a governor of. Because all the other cities, including East Orange and Irvington, the tough places, John, that didn't have the waterfront attractions of the universities and that kind of thing, there was another piece, Lenny. When we started doing distressed cities and put the responsibility with the money as opposed to the money with the city, Jerry, and started holding people accountable, attitude shifted, and some people got downright angry. So, they're doing that because they want those guys to fail. In reality, it'd been a bucket of money that had good intentions, and then when it had substance around, Lenny, people knew they had to be performing and held accountable. And when that went away, it created problems. The reason I mention that, because, again, my introduction, Governor, was Lenny and I shared a desk together in government, believe it or not. Lenny Coleman and I worked in the Hall of Records, the bastion of Democratic politics, only second to Hudson County, in an office with a lady who was the head of the Employment and Training Program, which was a new federal entity, and Coleman and Cooper were the two young staffers. We did not share an office, we shared a desk. I sat on one side, Lynn Coleman sat on the other. And this particular person would come in every day screaming, where's Lenny or where's Cardell? And we had to explain that one of us went to the bathroom, the other one was manning the ship. Fast forward, as Lenny went on, Governor, in many occasions, we worked it, we constantly talked about government and what we were there to do. And we went from staffers across from each other's desks to having the person who was looking for us every day working for us, if you recall. But that attitude Lenny carried into the cabinet and many other cabinet. We remember Kerry the nose. A lot of us remember the nose. And we remember the nose, and no one was upset with the governor. And I said, see, that's a smart politician. Everybody, including our party, was in love with Tom Kean. Kerry was over there saying, oh, no, that doesn't mean you're going to get it. And when Kerry was running, people remembered it. And they said, okay, right? So they said, okay, we'll take care of that. We'll fix that one, John, right? We'll fix that. But in all seriousness, what happened was there was a standard that was being set. And I saw this, and it helped me in my public life because I came along into elected office after Tom had sort of, the example. And I worked with Jim Florio. I was a commissioner at the Sports Authority for 5 years, a vice chairman. And Bob Mulcahy was still there, and it kept Bob, and we still couldn't get the deal done with the 76ers as much as we tried. But we got some things done in Atlantic City and some ideas that came about with Rutgers University and all those things. So smart government is what was winning the cities over. And the problem, of course, in our party structure, if you go in and you have a meeting and you're a Democrat with a Republican governor, you're sold out. And then the other mayors would say, what did he get? And when we start seeing the long-term effects, with all the kidding aside, the long-term effects, when you see in this city, this performing arts center that we're sitting in, I was a kid, I grew up in this town. And I'm telling you, and guys like Gus Henningberg, who I know for a long time, and we don't say much, but see, he's the old dude in the group. And the Lenny Colemans of the world, and I have great, and many of us have, and Malcolm, all of us, and again, party aside. And it was something that was very clear that Gus tried to keep people on track about doing what you're supposed to do. Doing what you're supposed to do. And there was not a lot of credit for that. So I watched Tom Kean, and it didn't seem like he was looking for any credit, and he just kept doing the work. And now he gets abundance of credit, well-deserved. The final comment, I was going off to Washington after having run for county executive, and there's sometimes there's good things about losing elections, Kerry, too. I got a call to go to work for the President of the United States and said, I was a kid on welfare in Newark, going from welfare to work like that. But I went to see Tom Kean. And I said, I have a question and I need your support. You know the President has nominated me to be Assistant HUD Secretary. Would you mind writing a letter and talking to folks in your party, and I could use your support? He said, well, I don't know. If you think that will help you, I will do whatever you need me to do. And at the time, Alphonse D'Amato was head of the committee. And of course, like all great Cuomos, some of them get along with everybody, and some of them have fights. And Alphonse D'Amato and young Andrew Cuomo were not fans of each other. I'm becoming the assistant secretary with Andrew Cuomo. And I was told, well, if you're going to be with Andrew Cuomo, you're going to have a problem. And I said, well, no. Tom Kean is writing a letter. And Tom Kean, and I kept talking about Tom Kean. It was like, this guy's being appointed by Bill Clinton, a Democrat. He's telling us about Tom Kean appointing a letter, and he's going to be Cuomo's number 2. And I said to them, because I'm smart enough to know that when people of character stands up with you, it matters. And that's the point. And I think if there's a lesson to be learned and something that we all can take from this, this is still my home state, and I love this place. It troubles my heart when I read some of the things that I read, because we get smashed all over the country in terms of when bad things happen. We need to take this here and show where governors work well with mayors and other folk. We have done great things in New Jersey. And Tom Kean set that example. And if we're going to get it right, go back to what Bob said. I would hope that all of us folks in this room, we'd better have a plan when we come out of this, Bob. Because this is the last best chance, because of what we have with the amount of talent, with the need, both from infrastructure to jobs, and the very things you just walked through, this whole economic development discussion fits right in where the national agenda should be. And perhaps out of this, and working with Rutgers, we can come up with some ideas so that we can say, along with our good leader and friend, Tom Kean, we've seen this done before. We've seen it done before, and use that, because otherwise we're going to get out of that cycle 3 years from now, and unfortunately we throw a ton of money to try to fix things real quick. I know that because we spent $7 billion when I was the assistant HUD secretary, and there were folks who said, why are you going to go to New Jersey? Christy Whitman's the governor. We had floods in New Jersey. And there were people that lived in New Jersey. It didn't matter what the governor was, but there were people that lived in New Jersey. And again, learning the difference between governing and the difference between partisan politics. So that I needed to say before I left New Jersey again, because many of you in this room I've known, and you come say, hey, Mayor, how you doing? I'm doing okay. And I think the good part of saying I'm doing okay is because I got a chance to see and feel and sense how to do things the right way in public life. And some of that through Tom Kean and other examples I can give. And the reason I mention that is because there are a lot of reasons that many of us, John, you've been through it, where your character comes under attack. You know, it only takes a moment to have your character destroyed. It takes a lifetime to build it. And I think people of strong character, because there are folks who did not say all these wonderful things about Tom Kean when he was governor. I'm right, and I know I'm right. I talked to my friend Lenny. They didn't say all these wonderful things. There were people who said, look, this guy's got to fail, otherwise the Republicans are going to run the state for 4 years. It wasn't about his agenda. They said he's got to fail because, you know, this guy is going to run the state party's going to have the state for 8 years. Well, fast forward. It's sort of like people saying Obama should fail immediately because we want the White House back. Well, the nation is failing, and Tom, if you can do anything, please do not remain silent during this current environment that we're in, because the propaganda that's out there is killing off all of this inclusive ideas that folks in this room have been a great part and that you've been a leader in. And I don't know what stage you're going to do it on. It could be at Rutgers, it could be wherever. Count me in that discussion, because I'm telling you folks in this room, living in that Washington corridor and hearing the noise, I was driving up and I told Ruth today, I'm not trying to dominate the conversation, but these are important issues that we better get to quick. I get on Turnpike, I'm driving up, and I think you heard the same thing. I flipped on the radio, 101 point, whatever it is, 5, and you get to the state, you got to hear what they're talking about. And they bashed Rutgers University from exit 1 to exit 9. And they talked and horribly about education and all of these money-grubbing people spending millions of dollars on things at Rutgers. And I mean, and then a woman calls in and she says, she starts the story by saying, my daughter had a 3.9 average. I went to Rutgers and there's legacy and I wanted her to go there. And then her cell phone broke up. And the commentator says, I think I knew what she was going to say. She was going to say that she couldn't get into Rutgers University because Rutgers want to get those students from overseas who will pay 3 times as much, and she couldn't get in because they want the out-of-staters, and they literally bashed Rutgers University and higher education in the state. And I'm saying, if we think it's a joke in terms of how propaganda is influencing this new split in America, we'd really better pay attention. And this is a beautiful effort here. But somehow we got to get in some other rooms, ladies. I'm telling you, because there's a sense and feeling out there, all of those things that we brought together, the inclusiveness, Tom, the issues of race, the issue of gender, the issue of tolerance is splitting at the seams. So we can sit here and I want to praise you forever. But I'm telling you, we still need your voice and many other folks like you if we're going to really get our hands on the pulse of this. I'll come to New Jersey anytime for a party for you, praise anything and say anything good about you. That's not what you need. That's not what makes Tom Kean unique. You got to call out the question when it's happening, because the real truth on the ground matters. And again, I solicit all of you in that. And Ruth, I would ask that if Rutgers in any way, that those students can begin to see where this thing is going, use this institute to pull them into their obligation, because they're the next generation. Thank you.
You had back then, you had teachers, and you're a teacher yourself. That was a profession that you got a master's degree from Columbia Teachers College. Is that you had teachers, you had people who were teaching elementary school, high school, who weren't even making $13,000, $14,000. And you had people talented people who were leaving the profession because they simply couldn't make a living. So to piggyback off of that, now we're fast forward, all this criticism of education and everything, but when you know, and it wasn't that far long ago. I mean, I heard somebody say the first time, 77, I think, Chick, you said commercials and stuff, that was before cell phones, 24-hour news, all of that. You know, we forget that it was back in the 80s that there was no minimum salary to start someone who was coming out of school with a degree in education to teach. And that's something that's not only education for our kids, but that plays into economic development. Because if you remember, for years, one of the things our state was known for is we exported our best and brightest, people who left the state, went somewhere else to school, and never came back. So I think that's one of the things that hasn't been said, needs to be said, because I think that was an important point in turning around our educational system.
One of the things that's unique about, just getting back to the Port Authority a little bit, is and also where you see Tom Kean's stubbornness, and I think, Kerry, you can speak to this, was the waterways. You know, no one at the port wanted the New York waterways to succeed. They said, they came back with data after data after, and Todd, you remember this. I mean, it was only one guy who wanted those waterways expanded. And tell them a little bit about that.
No, I can't tell you a little bit about it. Todd did that project and worked on it. I remember, however, Reed was there when we had one of those waterways named after Tom a few years ago. And the question is, did we want ferries going back and forth between? And was it an option? And Tom wanted it. He wanted it. That's all. And we had somebody willing to do it, Arthur Imperator. And we were going to make it happen, hell-bent to Sunday, one way or the other. And as things typically go, as much work as all the staff does, he got the boat named after him. I just got through playing golf. I got to tell this golf story real quick. We just got through playing. Bob Huey, Tom, myself, and Tony. We played golf, and it was relatively cold. It was in October. I don't know if I was in the best of shape. We go through these 18 holes. Tom is my partner. Tony is playing with Bob. We're about 4 down with about 5 to go holes. And we won the 5 of the last 5 holes to win 1 up. I hit my shot on the 18th hole up the hill about this far from the pin. Tom, I think, was hitting his 5th shot somewhere over the green. So we win 1 up. We beat Tony and him. He goes to Tony, "We beat your butt, didn't we?" He said it a little more profoundly than that. And I said, "There he goes again. There he goes again. I do all the work and he gets all the credit." I said, "It never ends. This is 30 years of this stuff." So the answer to it is a lot of people did a lot of work, Tony, to make the waterfront and the various modes of transportation across that. And Tom really did. He wanted path. We all thought the ferries were terrific, and he did too. And we used to ride them when we were kids. So it was a big issue to accomplish in that particular world. But as I said, he got the boat named after him.
I have a personal relationship that me and him are aware of. It's sort of informal. When we went to him at the Port Authority and he did what he did for my family, I knew he was my kind of guy. So whenever I would see him, and he'll tell you this, or anybody that's been around they'll notice it, I never shake his hand. Always put him in my arms, and he embraces me back the same way. So I'm getting back to saying, we were in Newark one day, and his chief of staff, Eddie McGlynn, called me at home and says, "Danny," he said, the governor wants you to be part of the greeting team with George Bush when he comes to Jersey. I said, "What?" He said, "He wants you to be up in the airport with us when this guy comes in." He said, "Get yourself together and get up here." So I went into Newark, and I met Eddie, and we were in the little area they had set aside for the president's plane. At that time, George was the vice president, for his plane to come in. And I come in the booth, and Eddie says, I come in the room, and Eddie says, "Danny, you ready?" I said, "Yeah." So we go out on the, a red carpet, the tarp, and we're standing there. The president comes off the plane. It's Governor Kean, I believe it was the mayor of Newark, and then it was me, and then it was Ed. So the president, he came off the plane, he shook hands with the, I believe with the governor first, then he touched the mayor, then he looked at me. Because we had seen him about 3 times before, because me and Bill Palatucci, whenever he came, he would always invite me and met him up in Fairleigh Dickinson in the rain. So whenever George Bush came to town, I'd be the first guy that he seen. So he looked at me and said, "Is there anybody else in the state of New Jersey other than you?" I said, "I'm just here, sir, as a guest of the governor's." So he asked me, "Well, what political office do you hold?" So I sort of stuttered because I'm not a politician. And the governor put his arms around me and said, Mr. Vice President, this is a personal friend of me and my family's. So from that point on, I knew exactly what kind of guy I was dealing with, and I knew I could just be who I wanted to be because I know the way he is and the way you guys commend him and whatever. He knows exactly what's going on. He's very clever. He reminds me a lot of myself. He's just formally educated. I am not. We're both on the same page. Right now, whatever's going on in this government, he knows exactly what it is, the way he's playing it. Dr. Fletcher and me and him had lunch up at Drew University. I took Doc Fletcher up there with me. He was the founder of Affirmative Action. Dr. Fletcher said, Danny, this is one of the smartest human beings I ever met in my life. He said, this guy knows what you're thinking before he starts talking. He said, all you got to do is stay close to him, okay, support him in every way you can, and when changes begin to come in this country, this guy won't be in the forefront. But to make a long story short, I look at what my brother said earlier about me and Matilda Cuomo. We're very close, me and her dad. He sort of raised me in the neighborhood. And I look at the different situations that I find myself coming into the Governor Kean's inner circle. He gave me two wonderful people that I found to be just like him. That was Peggy Howard and Ed McGlynn. If I didn't need a governor, as long as I had those two guys, I'm good. On the other side of that is that, all I can say is thank you so much for being who you are. I knew who you were when I first met you, and I'm so glad that you're still here, and change is going to come as a result of who you are and what you do, whether people like it or not, because they can't get around you. You know what time it is. And I want you to know that what you've done for me and my family, you've extended on to my son, who's named Danny Jr. He survived that, that stockbroker mess they had in 2002. He has his own broker-dealer firm in New York City. So I came from a janitor with my company and educated my son, who is now a licensed stockbroker with his own firm on Wall Street. And I'm coming back to you again because you're going to help him also. But God bless you and thank you.
One quick observation. I was familiar with he's hearing this for the first time. I came to New Jersey, I guess 1954 or 55, and among the names I was very familiar with was Kean. Now, how did I ever hear about Kean before I got to New Jersey? In one of my lives, I worked for United Negro College Fund for several years. And I got to know who were the supporters historically of the black colleges financially. And one of the names that I had heard over and over again was Kean. I didn't make the connection right away. I'm sharing that background simply to make the point that all the nice things you're saying about him, somebody else is responsible for. I mean, there's a whole bunch of Keans that came along ahead of him that made him the person you all are talking about today. One other quick comment. He often does things that are important without making any announcement about it. He appointed me as a commissioner of the Sports Authority, and I didn't know it until a Star-Ledger reporter called me one afternoon, and he says, I would like a comment from you about your appointment. Appointment to what? He said, the governor appointed you as commissioner of the Sports Authority. Governor who? What are you talking about? What sports authority? And I live almost across the street from the Sports Authority. I knew it, but I didn't know I was about to become part of it. The reporter reacted in disbelief. He said, I cannot imagine he didn't discuss this with you before he did it. I said, well, if we discussed it, it was in a language that didn't quite compute to this happening. The reporter was very confused. And if you go back and look at the newspaper stories, it says, we talked to Gus Henningberg about his appointment to the Sports Authority, and he claimed he didn't know anything about it. The history of his family before he ever got to New Jersey, and before that the family ever got to New Jersey, is obviously a major factor in the member of the Kean generation that you all know and are talking about today. And the one request, that same afternoon, after the reporter had called me and told me I had been appointed to the Sports Authority, I went up to the pool. It was in the summertime. Everybody at the swimming pool knew I had been appointed to the Sports Authority, but me. Neighbors who I'd never met before were coming up and congratulating me as if we were old buddies and stuff like that. And I'm saying, gosh, this is very confusing. But one other quick observation. In the course of several conflicts with the Port Authority, local government, state government, over the years, and I have managed to get involved in a lot of them, and have dealt with many governors in the process of doing this. The response from Tom Kean about subject X, whatever X was so very different than the other governors that I had gone to with problem X, and the problems were very similar from one governor to another. Generally, the governor would say, well, Gus, you know, we can't get involved in that. That's a racial matter, and so we can't be of any help. Another response was from some of the other governors was the next day there'd be a press conference where they would report to the press what they are doing to fix the problem, whatever that problem happened to be. Well, he never called a press conference that I was aware of about any of the problems, whether it was the one that was spoken to earlier or many others. But one day he very calmly said, and I forget what the issue was, well, you know, the Port Authority has to pay attention to me. I said, really? They don't communicate with me like they're paying any attention to you. I'm not sure they know that you and the governor of New York share these leadership roles with the Port Authority. And when the issue that Malcolm referred to earlier about that cleaning contract came up, and the governor very calmly said, well, I'll veto the minutes of the Port Authority if they don't do something about this. And I put it down on my little notes. I didn't expect that to go any further than that. It was said very quietly and very calmly in the middle of an hour-long conversation. The next thing I know, I begin to understand the governor saying I'll veto the Port Authority minutes and what that really meant. I didn't know the governor of New Jersey or the governor of New York and the governor of New York could veto the Port Authority minutes simply by saying I'm going to do it and writing on a piece of paper and killing everything that the Port Authority Board did that day on every subject, not just the issue that it was brought up about. So I wasn't terribly impressed when he said, I'll veto the Port Authority. First of all, I didn't believe him. Secondly, I didn't know what difference it made if he sat down there in Trenton and said he was going to do it, and it would drive the governor of New York crazy and all of his minions. But the point I'm making is that in the number of times, and I could spend an hour telling you about incidents or issues that I went to him with that were very confrontational, almost always with a racial context, which he was able to resolve without ever having appeared to be resolved, to be involved in getting it done. No press conference, no big speech about it, no nothing. But he understood the power and the influence of the governor of New Jersey very well. He clearly understood he could exercise it quite privately or quite publicly, depending on what his mood was on that given day. And my only complaint was when he appointed me as Sports Authority Commissioner, and I first talked to him about it, I said, next time you get ready to do something like this, could I be among the first to know? How come I got to find this out with a Star Ledger reporter who did not know how to spell my name? And as I made at the beginning of my comment, while I knew the name Kean before I came to New Jersey, through the philanthropy and the leadership of other members of the Kean family with the black colleges around this country, I didn't even make the connection when I got here and got to know him, that this was one of the members of the Kean family. And if you don't believe it, anybody here who knows Fisk University, go talk to them about the Kean family or many of the other black colleges. So he didn't, my point quickly, he didn't dream up all this stuff. He could not avoid having done all these things because it was in the genes. And I think I first met you, Tom, in some racial issue in the North Ward of Newark. And there were many people who were saying to me, well, what's the governor got to do with this? And I'm saying, ask him. He can probably explain why he's doing what he's doing better than I can. I'm not sure that he ever fully understood the impact when he would intervene in these racially charged issues. As much as the people around him, and if Steve were here, he could, where'd Steve left? He would be the first to tell you that among the people who could get Steve to shut up his mouth on any subject about he was a self-appointed expert, it's because Tom, and nobody had to tell you this, that Tom Kean had given him a call and saying, we'll work this out, just let it alone. In the years I worked for the Urban Coalition, whenever I needed the support of the corporate leadership in Newark, from Prudential and First Fidelity and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I didn't get them. And I don't mean I needed the community relations vice president. I needed the CEO. You go to him, you'd have a 5-minute conversation. Next day, the CEO of First National State Bank or Prudential or whoever it happened to be would call you up on the phone. Hi, Gus, how are things? I haven't heard from these folks in years, but I learned the lesson that he got a call yesterday from Tom Kean. I began to understand the dynamics that went on. And all the governors I have worked with in the course of my years in New Jersey, there has not been, I've worked with a number, all of them had the same statutory power that the ones before them had. He didn't have any more statutory power than any other governor before him. But he had more knowledge, influence, and legitimate concern about sensitive racial issues that the governors before him, one, knew nothing about, and two, didn't want to get within 50 yards of anything relating to him. Now, I had to figure all this out, because he never told me this stuff. And I've never talked about it with him about what I'm sharing with you. If he's hearing it, it's okay, but you know, he's hearing it for the first time. And it is a quality which many people who enjoy the influence, prestige, and visibility of being a governor of a major state do not have. Or if they have it, don't quite know how to maximally exercise it. And that characteristic, which is not quantifiable in terms of legislation, in terms of gubernatorial orders, and the rest of it, is, I think, one of his major contributions to the state of New Jersey. And finally, without him, this building that we're sitting in would not be here. And my guess is he would tell you one of the major fights he had when somebody came up with the wild idea, we're going to put a major performing arts venue in downtown Newark, New Jersey. And folks said, you have got to be crazy. Nobody will come. Nobody's going to pay for this thing. It was not a pleasant time as it related to the creation of the Performing Arts Center. Even the New York unions were objecting. And I'll just illustrate one point and I'll stop.
Thank you, Gus. This is a wonderful note to end on, and I think we've had. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Listen, I've been shut up by bigger folks.
I didn't mean to do that. Tony was whispering in my ear.
The morning before the grand opening of this building, where the governor, the entire legislature, and all the press and the CEOs and all the rest were going to be here, the police director of Newark got a phone call from a union in New York City which represented the people who sold tickets in the theaters in New York. And I happened to be in the police director's office the day before the legislature and the CEOs and the contributors showed up. I'm not sure what I was doing in his office, but his PR person came in and said, Director, the New York Union that represents the people who sell the tickets in the ticket windows is going to picket the grand opening tomorrow of the New Jersey Performing Arts Center because the people who sell the tickets in the ticket windows in New Jersey PAC are not in our union. And the guy who brought the message in, the police director, sat there, and then he looked at me and he says, Gus, what should our response be? And I said, the response should be, advise them, one, that you have to have a permit to picket. Two, you will not get a permit to picket. Three, if you picket without the permit, we will lock you up. And the police guy who had brought the message in is looking at him to say, well, what am I supposed to tell him? He said, that's what you tell him. I share that to make the point where not just people in New Jersey were fussing with him about backing this place. Just to make the point, it was not just the people in New Jersey who were fighting against putting the Performing Arts Center in downtown Newark. It had threatened the people in New York, which I enjoyed every minute of, I must tell you. But the number of hours, and it was many, many hours, of working with him on issues that never got made public, they did not need to be made public, was a very unusual experience. I just wish the people from New York had come over here and picketed the day of the grand opening, because I would have enjoyed sitting there as they hauled him off, because they were going to be put in jail, because he said they were going to be put in jail, or the police director said that. But I appreciate having been invited. I've learned things about him I didn't know. And I know some other things about him that he doesn't know I know that I'm not going to tell you all.
Thank you so much. This is the time now. First of all, thank you all for coming. I think this has been a wonderful day. But now the governor has the floor, and so I'm going to turn to you for concluding remarks.
First of all, thank you. I mean, not just thank you for all coming here today and all the nice things you said, but thank you for everything you did to make it all happen. I mean, the people around this room, you know, Gus talks about me in this building. Well, Gus was intimately involved in this building and trying to get it done. And every one of you were involved in one project or another. And without you, it wouldn't have happened. One of the things we were able to do, I think, was to pick some of the brightest and the best to serve with me in government. And Carrie's right. You know, I got credit for a lot of your accomplishments. And that was a great pleasure. but nevertheless, you did it. I mean, there were great people there, great people in the legislature. I mean, I had a Democratic Senate all 8 years. And yet I think if you put the accomplishments down on paper that we got done together, I'll match them against any period in state history as far as absolute bills passed and accomplishments we did together. And we stood up together when I signed the bills. And I complimented Republicans and Democrats in their own districts when they got the things done. So it was that. And I came to this, you know, I always think a governor, you know, look at somebody who's running, and they don't change an awful lot. I mean, I had been an early member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I had marched with Dr. King. I had been involved in a lot of the civil rights issues at the time. I was Essex County. I did grow up shopping and doing things in the city of Newark and having friends in the city of Newark. I did run at the time of the riots. I was, because I was then the leader of the largest delegation in the legislature as a freshman, all the legislation for the cities after the riots I sponsored. First urban aid bill, a lot of other things. So I came to these views fairly naturally, and I was sort of formed by them. And that's why I wanted to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish when I became governor. I believed, and I still believe, that economic development in this state can't happen without involving its cities, and that you've got to bring the cities back if you're going to have the kind of state that we all want to live in. And I wish I could convince other people today about that, because I think it's just as true now as it was then. So this is, anyway, I'm proud of those 8 years. I'm proud of those 8 years because of what a lot of people did together. And so thank you all. Thank you all for what you did then. Thank you all for coming today. You are my friends, and you will continue to be my friends. Thank you all very, very much.